1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. Oh, that's loud. Sounds like a... Yeah. I sound like a loudmouth. That's better.
Hi, I'm Andy Shalal. I'm the owner of Busboys and Poets. We are so happy to have Rock Newman and the Rock Newman Show join our tribe here. Hi, I'm Andy Shalal. I'm the owner of Busboys and Poets. We are so happy to have Rock Newman and the Rock Newman Show join our tribe here. We are a tribe. This is a place where racial and cultural connections are consciously uplifted, a place where art, culture, and politics intentionally collide. This is a space to take a deliberate pause and feed your mind, body, and soul. We believe by creating such a space, we can actually change our community, change DC, and change the world for the better. And now, the Rock Newman Show. Hi.
Good morning. Today, Saturday, August the 10th, 2013. This is the Rock Newman Show. I'm Rock Newman, and we are broadcasting live from the stage of the Langston Hughes Room at Busboys and Poets, 14th and V Street, Northwest Washington, D.C. And again, today, I think we have a great show for you. Let me get right to what we're doing today. It is my pleasure to have really some interesting guests and a surprise guest. And we're going to keep that surprise guest a surprise until a little bit later on. But beyond the surprise, and much better than the surprise, is we have in studio in the first hour with us today the District of Columbia Police Chief Kathy Lanier. And later, there is continuing to be a raging debate. And the momentum is building in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, and I think really throughout the country, regarding the name of the Washington NFL football franchise. There is an effort underway to get the owner of the team, Dan Snyder, who would be the decision maker, to change the name of the team. More and more people from a cross-section of society, from grassroots to Capitol Hill, are demanding the name be changed, identifying it as something that is insensitive, that is, and racist. And there is that debate that is going on. Just this week, Slate magazine, which is owned by the Washington Post, came out with a column, a lengthy column that was co-authored by their sports editor, Josh Levin. And they said that they would not use the R word anymore. And so we're going to have Josh Levin here, along with Dave McKenna. Dave McKenna is the Washington City paper reporter that Dan Snyder actually sued. So there's a lot to be done on that particular subject. So we do have a good show. Tell all your friends. Tune in, rocknewmanshow.com, and they can see all that's going here from the Busboys and Poets location. And also later this evening, from 6 to 9 p.m., the show is broadcast on WPWC We Act Radio, 1480 a.m. from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. But without any further ado, let me welcome Chief of Police Kathy Lanier. Welcome to the Rock Newman Show.
Nice to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of what is your busy schedule to join us here. I've got about 14,000 questions to ask you, and not enough time. Part of what we try to do here for our viewing and listening audience is when we interview folks, is not to just talk about what they do, but for our listening audience to try to understand and feel who the person is, who they are. So to that end, let me go back. Where were you born?
Born at Providence Hospital, Washington, D.C.
So you
Born in Washington, D.C.
Northeast Washington,
Yes.
D.C., born bred.
And in fact, live in Northeast Washington right now.
Okay. So as a child, you used to take D.C. the whole time or move around?
I grew up in Prince George's County, literally right on the D.C. line, Tuxedo Road, little industrial neighborhood right off of Route 50 where
Right.
New York Avenue is.
Absolutely.
About
And,
an eighth of a mile from where I live right now.
That's interesting. There's a boxing gym over there, Round One
Yes.
boxing gym that sort of helped make Tuxedo Road famous. It's got the Pepsi-Cola
That's
plant
right.
over there, right over by Prince George's Hospital and the
That's
whole
right.
bit. Okay, so you grew up there.
Yes.
Where did you go to elementary school?
Elementary school, Gladys Noon Spellman, well, as I guess it's called Gladys Noon Spellman now, Cheverly Tuxedo Elementary,
Right.
right on Tuxedo Road. Junior high, Mary McLeod Bethune, over in Seat Pleasant. And I unfortunately dropped out after junior high and went back to school and got my GED. But I would have gone to Fairmont Heights.
So let me ask you a question. Seat Pleasant, you said.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming junior high school for you would have been somewhere in the 80s?
Yes, well,
70s?
yeah,
80s?
79, 80, 82.
Okay. Now, Seat Pleasant, which of course is for those of you who are out there in the hinterlands around the rest of the world, you might not know the areas that we're talking about. Seat Pleasant is very much, if you go across the DC line, you're
It's
in...
DC almost.
That's right. You're almost at Seat Pleasant. And it is where someone by the name of Sugar Ray Leonard grew up in that area. That was a predominantly African-American community
Yes.
at that time.
Yes.
Okay. In this day and time, these questions, although they should not matter, sometimes to put things in context, it's good to have the information. So you lived in a predominantly African-American community.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Now, were you a light-skinned person like me living there, or were you Caucasian?
Well,
Or are you? Because
Well, it
it's
all
not something
depends
I've focused on.
It all depends on kind of what age group you're in. When you're kids, really, nobody really paid attention. Nobody really cared. You're just a kid.
Uh-huh.
So in the community, when I was up through junior high school,
Right.
we were just all kids. Nobody really paid attention to that
Right.
at the child level.
Mm-hmm.
Once you start becoming a little bit more mature and you listen to the adults who all are tainted in some way,
Right.
then race starts to become an issue. So when I was going to junior high, I was one of just a few groups of kids that were bused in, and only a handful of white kids that went to the school. I never had any problems. I got along with everyone fine. My friends were all either African American, Latino. It's just we were still
Okay, because
kids.
that was going to be my question.
Yeah, I didn't have any problems. We had some neighborhood-based fights. We would group up in our group from our neighborhood and defend our neighborhood. But
Right.
again, even the kids from my neighborhood were largely African American.
Uh-huh.
So we had the same problems everybody had. Neighborhoods would fight neighborhoods, but we didn't have any real racial issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So now you went to Mary McLeod Bethune
Yes,
Junior High School, and after junior high school, you dropped out.
I did.
Tell us about that.
Well, I wasn't a real smart teenager. Like a lot of teenagers, common sense is you're still developing at that age.
Right.
So I dropped out of school, ran away from home, ended up getting married and having my son.
Now, how old were you then?
15.
15 years old.
15.
So at 15, you dropped out of school
I was
and
alone.
ran away from home, as in really ran away from home.
I ran away from home, yes.
Where did you go?
Well, I ran off and got married. Had my son who's now 31.
So you got you got married at 15 or 16?
I did.
At 15 or 16?
16.
Wow. How old was
Day after my 16th birthday.
How old was the guy you married?
A little older.
Uh-huh.
A little older.
Okay. Okay. So at that particular point in time,
So
Kathy Lanier from Seat Pleasant was a pretty fast young thing.
I was a pretty well-matched statistic to my neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. somebody that just wasn't going to make it and was going to be a
I wasn't
statistic
going to make
and
it.
going
You're
to
right.
get in trouble.
And my son was destined to be one as well at that point.
Right.
So at 16 years old, I was, 17 years old, I was a single mom because I had divorced by then, obviously, and separated. And 17 years old, I was a single mom with a ninth grade education.
You know what, Kathy, you said something. You said, obviously, I was divorced. Obviously, I was divorced by then. So you left school at 15, you got married at 16.
Mm-hmm.
Got married at 16, you were divorced at 17.
Mm-hmm.
What caused the divorce?
Well, obviously it wasn't a brilliant marriage to begin with. I was a kid.
Yeah.
I was just too young to understand the concept of marriage, and it just wasn't, it just didn't work out. But the bottom line was I was a parent at the time, and I had a son to take care of. So everything else became irrelevant at that point. Go back to school, get an education, get a job.
Well,
all that mattered.
and that's what I was going to say. So you made that divorce. Now you're the mother of a son, and so take us through that time period as to what specifically you did during that 17, 18, 19-year-old period of time.
Well, I went back to, actually when I was 16, I went and took classes and got my GED. So I had my GED when I was 16. I went to work. I worked initially as a secretary and as a waitress. So I worked 2 jobs.
Where'd you waitress?
O'Brien's Pit Barbecue.
Okay. Okay.
In the bar.
Okay.
So I really wasn't even old enough to be in the bar when I first got the job. I was a little bit before my 18th birthday. At the time, 18, you were old enough. But, a single mom. I worked as a secretary during the day, worked as a waitress in the evening. I was trying to save up money so I could send my son to a better school. Public schools had their challenges back then, as they do in a lot of places now.
Sure.
So, I worked 2 jobs, went to school. I started taking classes at Prince George's Community College, and my mom and my grandmother helped take care of my son. So one would babysit during the day, my grandmother, and my mom would babysit in the evenings when I was working my second job, and then I went to school on my days off. And
Kathy, let me stay here right in that zone for a minute, because you said something, I wasn't a very smart teenager. Well, probably you didn't make some smart decisions. But given the decisions that you made to make a better life for yourself, there's a certain smartness there about that.
That was called my mother.
What I'd like to understand, because you went from a period of irresponsibility to real responsibility. And what it was it motherhood that prompted that, or was it something else, or a combination of things?
I think it all goes back to, there's no doubt that, when my son was born, I realized that his entire life was dependent on me, and that I wanted to give him better opportunities than I had, because we struggled.
Sure.
My mom was a single mom, 3
Right.
kids.
Right.
So I wanted to give him every opportunity, but it all goes back to the way my mom raised me. My mom raised me, to get an education and be able to take care of yourself and take care of your children at all costs. My mom was a fantastic parent, and she never gave up on us, and she always provided for us no matter what the circumstances. And so I think it all goes back to her. Even though I didn't have a lot of common sense initially, once my son was born, what my mom had instilled in me kind of kicked in, survival. I have a child to take care of, and survival kicked in.
So now I'm really going to fast forward, and then we're going to go back. So you're sitting here now, you're the police chief, and, you had this sort of like incredible experience. And, I remember at some point a few years ago, one of my relatives went to jail, and I wrote him a blistering letter saying, what the hell were you thinking about? Just what you did just didn't make any sense from a business point of view, and you pretend to be a businessman. The business that you were doing was illegal, but you were dumb the way you were doing that. So if you were going to do it, at least be smart about it. But you were just dumb about doing it. So he wrote back to me and said, well, somebody like you wouldn't understand what I was going through. I was like, dude, I grew up in a home without indoor plumbing. I came through some street. Don't tell me about that. So today, let's bring it to today. Unwed mothers in the community. What's your message to them before we go to break?
Well, there's a lot of single parents out there and grandparents that are taking care of kids. Like my mother and grandmother helped me take care of my son, and they really are the key to the success of holding families together and bringing families forward. So, to the strong mothers and grandmothers out there, single parent or not, do what parents do and take care of your kids and stick together and pull through. And I see that every day, and I do understand.
Yeah.
I do understand how important that is.
You know what? Before we do go to this break, just hearing your story here now, and it's not like this is groundbreaking news that you haven't talked.
It's out there.
You haven't talked about it before, but from where I sit, hearing and understanding your story and your struggle, which is so comparable to the struggle of so many kids today. There should be a TV show done in the Washington, D.C. area, and I think a movie made on the life of Kathy Lanier. You heard it here. Now, you might have heard that here first.
Heard it here first.
This is the Rock Newman Show, much more with the District of Columbia Chief of Police Kathy Lanier when we return after these brief messages.
This is Leprechaun Tim Pohanka from Pohanka Nissan and Pohanka Hyundai. It's hard to be down on your luck when you're Virginia's first choice for new Nissan and Hyundais, but I need to sell 60 cars this week. Right now, I'll pay you big bucks for your good luck. Bring down any good luck charm you've gotten based on the sale price of the car you choose. I'll give you up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car this week. Today, your lucky penny is worth plenty, up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car you want. Stop moping and hoping you'll get approved. With my For the People credit approval process, the banks are looking to get lucky and lend to you, even if you've been turned down before. Bring me any good luck charm and I'll give you up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car today. Hurry, once I get rid of 60 cars, the luck runs out. All offers require bank approval, so call us at 1-800-POHANKA, visit Pohanka Nissan and Pohanka Hyundai on Route 1 in Fredericksburg, or better yet, log on to timpohankaforthepeople.com. And when we make a deal, I promise it'll be your lucky day. I'm Tim Pohanka, and I'm a leprechaun for the people.
Hello to all my friends in the DMV. I am Rock Newman from the Rock Newman Show. I want to tell you about the MGM Grand National Harbor, the most exciting project to come to the District, Maryland, or Virginia in quite some time. You're going to have great fun. Come on down, support this project with all you have. It is going to be wonderful for the area. We're going to increase our tax base. We're going to get funding for the police department, for ambulance, for fire, for education. It is really a project that is going to benefit our area. Folks, we want to support in a very strong DMV kind of way this great project from the MGM Grand National Harbor.
And now, the Rock Newman Show.
Welcome back, folks. Today, August 10th, 2013, in studio with us here on the stage of the Langston Hughes Room. I just like to say that, at Busboys and Poets. Police Chief Kathy Lanier. We left off attempting to allow the listening audience and the viewing audience to find out who Kathy Lanier, who she really is. And part of that is understanding from whence you come and from whence you came, from whence you come, from whence you came, whatever. Here you are. So right now we were at the point where you're 18, 19 years old. You'd gone back and gotten your GHD, and you started working. You started working in a restaurant, started working in a club, doing some things. Take us from there.
So I wanted to continue to get my education so I could get a better job and, make enough money to put my son in school. And ultimately, I wanted my son to go to college, opportunity that nobody in my family had. So I actually saw an ad in the paper for the Metropolitan Police Department. I was 23 years old, hiring, and in the ad they had tuition reimbursement was part of the deal. I was taking 2 classes a semester because that's all I could afford. So it would have taken me like 65 years.
Where were you taking those classes?
Prince George's Community College.
Okay.
So I went with a couple of friends. We came down and they were testing at Ballou, and they took the first 1,000 people in the door to take the exam, and I passed the exam. And was hired by MPD when I was 23 years old. So
MPD, Metropolitan Police Department.
Metropolitan Police
For
Department.
those of you that don't know.
1990. So for those who are not from Washington, D.C., that was the bad days. Back we had 479 murders my first year on the job.
Yeah, I was going to say, you said 1990, and just so you understand that when Kathy Lanier became a police officer in Washington, D.C., in 1990, Washington, D.C., was the murder capital.
It was.
Of the world.
Yep.
Of the country.
Yep. So 479 murders our first year, and my first year. So I started kind of going back to school. I switched over to UDC, and I took classes at UDC. I started studying for promotional exams. So I walked the footbeat, Georgia Avenue by Howard University, and just a little bit north of Howard. And then took the sergeant's exam, lieutenant's exam, captain's exam. So while I was getting my education, I was taking promotional exams to move up to the ranks. And I was able to put my son in private school. So he graduated from DeMatha and went on to college. So and I did what I set out to do. I worked my way through the ranks, got my degrees. I since have gotten 2 master's degrees. I went to Johns Hopkins.
So you got your undergraduate degree in what? What was that?
I got a bachelor's and a master's from Hopkins in management, and then I got a second master's in Homeland Security, National Security from Naval Postgraduate School. So I just, kind of as I was working my way through the ranks, working my way through the education system, and then putting my son through his, we almost graduated from college at the same time. He actually helped me with my homework quite often.
You and your son
My
almost
son and
graduated
I,
at the same time. Wow.
Took me 20 years. It took him 4 and a half.
So, you mentioned something, and obviously we want to get into the nitty-gritty, into the weeds a little bit of police work.
Yes.
So you say you were up at Howard University, so then you were like Euclid and Fairmont and Girard and
Little bit
Harvard
north,
Street
Park Morton.
and up further up. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
Park Morton area.
Yeah, going in towards Petworth and the whole bit. So, and you say you were taking the exams for sergeant and coming up the ranks. I had an interesting discussion with someone earlier in the week, and they were talking about we're talking about something that we talked about last week on this show, which was the statistics of the city is now a little less than 50% African American, and that 83% of all the rest between, I think it was 2009 2011 were of African Americans, and 91% of all drug arrests were of African Americans. So I want to come back to that, but in that context, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who pointed out, who suggested that police officers when they go out on calls, the more arrests that they make, and I think arrests that they make and close, when they close cases, that some kind of way puts them in a better position to be rewarded with higher pay, or they can be in position to get a higher rank. So, I mean, does that
No, it doesn't work
ring
that
a
way.
bell at all?
The only thing that determines promotion for the rank of from officer to sergeant, sergeant to lieutenant, lieutenant to captain, it's civil service exam. You take a test. It's a written exam. You take it with everybody else. It's the same test. You come out in a ranking, and then there's an assessment center, and there's a final ranking, and there's no assessment of performance. There's no assessment of arrest. None of that plays into promotion. So it has nothing to do with promotion. Closing cases, arrest numbers in closing cases, numbers of arrests is not even included in your performance, because it depends on what your assignment is. A business beat foot patrol officer probably is not going to make a lot of arrests at all. The point of a foot patrol officer is to prevent
Things from happening.
right. So in my opinion, arrest is a sign of failure for us. Our job is crime prevention.
Right.
When we make arrests, obviously we failed. We have to arrest somebody.
Right.
So we don't use arrest as a measure of performance for obvious reasons. Our job is to prevent crime. If we have to make arrests, we miss something else. So, again, depending on what your assignment is, you may or may not have opportunities to make arrests. So and it is a commonly held perception in the community, though, that there's somehow some reward or some quota, but there isn't. And it doesn't actually improve the image of a police officer at all. What really dictates how many arrests you get is how many calls for service. 90% of what dictates how many arrests one officer gets versus another officer, if they're both in police cars, taking 911 calls, is the number of calls they get. Mm-hmm. You respond to 911 calls all day long. Your entire shift, you're going from one call to the next call to the next call to the next call. And the biggest predictor of arrest is how many calls you get that day.
So, and tell me how that works. So somebody calls up and said, my wife is over here beating me with a bedpost.
Happens every day. Lots.
And so that goes into the call center.
And a car is dispatched. Whatever car is assigned to that area or closest to that area is dispatched. And when the officers get on the scene, suspects on the scene, evidence of a crime, arrest is made. This is about 85 to 90% of arrests. Then there's self-initiated arrests. If you're a vice officer or a narcotics officer or a prostitution enforcement officer, you're going to go out and work those types of crimes: drugs, prostitution. We have traffic enforcement officers. They work traffic offenses. So those are self-initiated arrests. And then there's the everyday police officer who's responding from 911 call to 911 call, who will make some self-initiated arrests, but that's a very small number. The vast majority of the arrests that we make, again, I'd say 85 to 90% is going to be based on 911 calls. People call in a drug complaint. They call in, disorderly conduct. They call in loud noise. A lot of the social community-based disturbance is a vast majority of our calls. And then you get the domestic violence, shootings, stabbings, things like that.
Before we get too far away from the comment about, you at one point patrolling the Howard University area, a lot of my friends, having been a Howard student, having worked at Howard, and just a lover of Howard University, we were all just like kicked in the gut hearing the news about the young gentleman who got killed at Howard
Mr.
University.
Sykes, yeah.
Omar Sykes.
Mm-hmm.
Any update on, whether or not you're getting close to an arrest for the people that were responsible for his crime?
Well, there's obviously a very active investigation. What I will say is that there was an arrest made of a person who had committed a burglary there at the residence earlier, prior to. And also, that same person was involved in another armed robbery. So we don't know if there's a connection between that person and the murder. But there is a very active investigation going on. So we do know that there were 2 people involved in that robbery. That was a robbery that went bad, that resulted in Mr. Sykes losing his life. But I'm very confident with the work the detectives are doing that we will eventually close that case.
Yeah.
The sooner the better for the family and for the the students at Howard.
And what was, of course, horrible news for the university, somewhere
Yes.
3 weeks, maybe a month after that, a young lady was followed into one of the buildings
Sexual
on the
assault.
university, and there was a sexual assault.
Yes, yes. And, you know, I spoke with the president of Howard, and our 3rd District commander works with Chief James up at Howard, and they have fantastic security up there. And 2 very high-profile incidents like that can really portray to outsiders and prospective students that this is not a safe campus, but it really, truly is. These are 2 incidents that happened, extremely unfortunate, but really is not an indictment on the safety of the campus, you know, around the campus there, because that's a very safe environment. Crime is pretty low up there in that area. But, yeah, just 2 really horrible incidents.
Well, according to most accounts, violent crime and crime across the board in Washington, D.C., over the last years has plummeted, has dropped dramatically. Now, if crime had gone up on your watch, you know,
I'd be gone.
rightfully so, people would be calling for your head. And here's what I believe, you know, sort of when you're in that position, when you're in the hot spot, you know, and the results show perhaps that a good job is not being done, you get kicked out.
Yeah,
And you should get kicked out.
I agree.
When good things happen on your watch, it's okay, in my estimation, to take a bow sometime. I mean, always we know that there's work to be done. Part of what I'd like for you to...
Can you talk to the rest of the journalists and media outlets out there? Because that just doesn't seem to be everybody's opinion.
Okay, but so here's the point, is what I'd like to do for you to kind of share with those that are listening is if you can walk us through, we've got 4 or 5 minutes left in this particular segment, and we'll come back again, but if you could share with us, what are the factors that now make the city because in essence, if crime is dramatically down, what does that mean? It's a much safer place to live in. What are the ingredients that have made that happen?
You know, I've written 2 articles that were published to try and share with the other law enforcement community what I feel was most important in driving the violent crime here down, because it is kind of contrary to what most policing tactics around the country are. Everybody touted New York and the big drop in violent crime in New York based on what was done in downtown New York, which was zero tolerance kind of hot spots policing, right? That zero tolerance, if you remember New York, when they cleaned up New York, they were talking about the squeegee guy, you know, you arrest the small offenses and then the bigger offenses, you know, kind of go away. And that was fine and worked well in downtown New York, but that doesn't work well in neighborhoods and it doesn't work well in communities. And what happens, I think, is police departments around the country just kind of copied that hotspot zero tolerance policing in neighborhoods. And what we do when we do that is we alienate the communities that we need to bring in the most. So, example for Washington, D.C. If we did zero tolerance, and we had done zero tolerance hotspots policing, pick a neighborhood, neighborhood with violent crime, let's say in Anacostia, Clay Terrace, all right? We do zero tolerance hotspots policing. We flood the neighborhood with cops, so we put 20 cops there on 3 to 11s, evening shift.
Yeah.
We tell them, arrest everybody for every minor offense. So they go out there, and within the first 2 hours, they get a guy who runs a stop sign who has an expired permit. They lock him up. They get a woman who's, 58 years old, sitting out on the wall drinking a can of beer for drinking in public. They lock her up, right? And then by 7 p.m., all the cops are up in the station processing those minor arrests. Right. And what happens in Clay Terrace?
Right. Somebody gets shot.
Then the real criminals come out, and you get the home invasions, the carjackings, and the shootings.
Right.
And so to the community, what that looks like, it looks like we're either in cahoots with the criminals somehow. Right. We don't really care about the community because obviously we're locking up the largely law-abiding citizens.
Right.
And so when something does happen and we can't get information, what we fail to realize is that this might be the neighborhood with the most violent crime, but it's also the neighborhood with the most victims and witnesses. And now we've alienated them.
Right.
So we did the exact opposite. We put foot patrol officers in those neighborhoods. We told our officers to go out there and make connections with people in the neighborhood so that they feel comfortable providing you with information. And it took a couple of years, but now when a crime occurs, we close the case, especially violent crimes and homicide. We have a very high closure rate for homicides. And we get a lot of tip information in before crime occurs because neighbors will talk to that footbeat
Well,
officer.
see, and that's just what I wanted to get into, because part of what I've come to understand is that under your leadership, there has been an emphasis put on really developing a partnership with the community. I heard you say something that I thought was fascinating, and that is that the better part of policing is the community policing. It's creating an environment where the community helps you to police the community in which you were talking about.
Yeah, communities really set their own standard for what they, the standard for what they tolerate and what they don't tolerate. Our job is just to assist them with that.
Yeah.
They set the standard, and I think if they have relationships with individual police officers, we can't just be the Metropolitan Police Department, this big anonymous police force that only shows up when bad things happen or to lock somebody up. They got to know officers by name. They got to know that he's going to be here on 3 to 11s, his days off for this, and when he gets here, if I got something to tell him, I'm going to tell him, because I know he's going to do something about it, or she's going to do something about it. That is really the key. Once they establish that relationship and they see information is provided and action is taken, then they start to trust you, and that's when the information really starts to come in. They want to see that something's done with that information.
Right. Okay. Folks, you're learning all about how to be a police chief. Who wants to be a police chief? We come back after these messages with Kathy Lanier. What an interesting interview this is. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Back to the Rock Newman Show in just a moment.
Hey, this is Leprechaun Tim Pohanka from Pohanka Nissan and Pohanka Hyundai. It's hard to be down on your luck when you're Virginia's first choice for new Nissan and Hyundais, but I need to sell 60 cars this week. Right now, I'll pay you big bucks for your good luck. Bring down any good luck charm you've gotten based on the sale price of the car you choose. I'll give you up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car this week. Today, your lucky penny is worth plenty, up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car you want. Stop moping and hoping you'll get approved. With my For the People credit approval process, the banks are looking to get lucky and lend to you, even if you've been turned down before. Bring me any good luck charm and I'll give you up to $4,777 off any nicer, newer car today. Hurry, once I get rid of 60 cars, the luck runs out. All offers require bank approval, so call us at 1-800-POHANKA, visit Pohanka Nissan and Pohanka Hyundai on Route 1 in Fredericksburg, or better yet, log on to timpohankaforthepeople.com. And when we make a deal, I promise it'll be your lucky day. I'm Tim Pohanka, and I'm a leprechaun for the people.
Hello to all my friends in the DMV. I am Rock Newman from the Rock Newman Show. I want to tell you about the MGM Grand National Harbor, the most exciting project to come to the District, Maryland, or Virginia in quite some time. You're going to have great fun. Come on down, support this project with all you have. It is going to be wonderful for the area. We're going to increase our tax base. We're going to get funding for the police department, for ambulance, for fire, for education. It is really a project that is going to benefit our area. Folks, we want to support in a very strong DMV kind of way this great project from the MGM Grand National Harbor.
And now, the Rock Newman Show.
Welcome back, folks. Today, August the 10th, 2013, we're at Busboys and Poets in 14th and V Street in Northwest Washington, D.C., broadcasting from the stage of the Langston Hughes Room. The District of Columbia Chief of Police is our guest this hour. And there's so much to talk about. Let's get back to it. Last week, sitting in that chair, Phil Fernisi, who is a gentleman from the Washington Lawyers Committee, he co-authored a report that I referenced earlier about what seemed to be the disparity of arrests in Washington, D.C. The statistics, again, were that the population of African Americans are now just below 50%, and that 83% of all arrests between 2009 and 2011, so over the course of 3 years, were African Americans. 83% arrested were African Americans. That 91% of all drug arrests were African Americans. And he extrapolated a few things from that.
Yes, he did.
The one that I thought that was most critical and even damning, and I kind of pressed him on it and he didn't back away from it, was that he indicated that he felt that those numbers proved that there was an economic incentive that the big developers are building $600,000 condos and people in poverty can't afford them, so that there was an intentional something going on to drive those in poverty out of the city, and part of that was arresting them and harassing.
That is a huge conspiracy theory. Huge.
Okay. And to that, Kathy Lanier, Chief of Police, would say what?
Well, I mean, first of all, you have to consider the statistics are nationwide. The disparities in arrests for African Americans is nationwide, and it's been that way for decades.
Which doesn't make it right.
Does not make it right, but to say that it's because of this new gentrification and a deliberate intent to drive African Americans out of the city, I'm just saying, if you look at the fact that this is a nationwide, statistics are like this nationwide, they've been that way for decades, and academics and practitioners and everybody has tried to come up with what is the answer, why is it that there are disparate arrest rates. If I had the answer to that question, I would tell you, hey, if I could answer that question, I could tell you why is it that 94% of everybody who's the victim of homicide in Washington, D.C. in the last few years 94% were African American, and 91% of the people arrested for homicide were African American. If I had the answer to that, wouldn't I be a great police chief? I don't have the answer. But these are the things that concern police chiefs and police officers and policymakers nationwide. It is not a new trend. It is a nationwide trend. I disagree with some of the things he pulls from the report and the statistics that he uses to say drug arrests, 91%. If you're going to isolate, targeting any particular population, you have to look at possession only, mere possession, so no other charge. You didn't get arrested for stabbing somebody and have marijuana in your pocket, right? Or you're not selling, you didn't have a kilo. So you have to really kind of isolate a little bit that. And I think this is a discussion that has been going on for years, and nobody really is looking at all the things that play into it. Do I feel like my officers are targeting African Americans? I don't. I mean, 60% of my police department is African American. The vast majority of my vice officers that do drug work are African American. Do I have the answer as to why the African American population is higher representation than whites or Hispanics? I don't.
Okay, because we talked about this last week, and I think that this is something that if we isolate and try to figure out how and why it happens, according to his research, the usage of drugs is comparable across economic, social backgrounds.
Based on self-reporting, correct.
So in other words, the white community around George Washington University and American University, they use the same amount of drugs as folks in Southeast Washington,
maybe more,
DC.
But probably different types.
Okay. So if the drug use is comparable, but of those who are comparably using drugs, the rate, if it's 50-50, if it's kind of even, but 9% of the white population is being arrested for drugs and 91% of the black population, there's something we got to figure out there.
Well, see, one of the things that the ACLU actually included in their report, because they did the nationwide study, and when they looked at Washington, D.C., they said, hey, look, if you look at this neighborhood in Ward 7 and this neighborhood in Ward 3, we made, I think it was 250 arrests for drug possession in the Ward 7, so an African-American community, and only 12 arrests in Ward 3. So what we looked at is how many drug complaints or calls for service? How many people called the police in those two neighborhoods? There was 518 calls for service over here that resulted in 249 arrests. There was 12 calls for service here that resulted in 12 arrests. So a lot of what drives the police responding to a neighborhood is that 911 call. And I can tell you, I just got 3 emails while I'm sitting here. One from Southeast Washington complaining about why are we subjected to all this drug use in the community? Why aren't the Metropolitan Police Department arresting these guys that are smoking drugs on our corner? So, you know, the communities that call the police and make complaints, we're going to respond. And you know these.
You know that's an interesting premise right there, because basically what you're saying is 200 and some people got arrested because there were 500 drug complaints. But up in on MacArthur Boulevard, they're using just as many drugs and smoking whatever they're doing, but only 12 people call. Now, when you think
somebody's not going to call if you're sitting in your house smoking dope.
Okay, so but I guess the point I wanted to make there is when you heard this word snitch, well, it seems like in those communities where snitch is a bad word, they're snitching. They're calling. But up at MacArthur Boulevard, you know, they're doing illegal stuff, but y'all ain't snitching. So y'all need to start snitching.
Well, I'll tell you who calls, and that's typically parents. They don't want their kids who have to walk to school and walk through, you know, drug markets or drug use. They don't want their kids to have to walk through that. Or if they just paid, you know, to move into one of the neighborhoods that's being renovated over there, and these are, you know, young families, they don't want their kids, you know, being subjected to that. So they're largely the ones that call. But again, you have to also consider that, you know, in the white communities, prescription drug abuse is the big drug, right? And neighbors are not going to see you abusing pills, prescription drugs that you take from a family member. Smoking marijuana, and really the big driver, I think, behind a lot of this is there is a very strong debate right now on legalization of marijuana.
And how do you feel about it?
Well, you know, I'm kind of torn a little bit. You know, I agree. I don't think that people should spend long periods of time in jail for possession of marijuana. I don't think that this is a jailable thing. Possession of marijuana, sending people to jail, I don't think that's the solution. You know, but I'm a police officer, and possession of marijuana is illegal, and for me not to take action, you know, would be malfeasance of office. So I think the debate is a healthy debate. I think they need to look at maybe civil penalties instead of criminal penalties. I think there's a lot of different things you can look at, from decriminalization to types of penalties. But yeah, I agree that, you know, putting people in jail for possession of marijuana is not, you know, the solution.
Yeah, as in the 40-year war on drugs.
Right.
Is we need to do something else. That now is, it seems to me, if there was ever good intent with that, and that's debatable, but if there was good intent, it's time to get rid of it.
And when you're talking about marijuana, you're not talking about crack cocaine, PCP, heroin, whole different debate.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, what's behind most crime, drugs, and alcohol? Alcohol's a biggie.
Yeah.
I would probably say a lot more crime is correlated to alcohol use than to drug use, and certainly marijuana use.
Right. You know, you've got some 17, 18-year-olds out there that might be watching this show, and they are thinking about what they're going to do with their lives, maybe even people who are youngsters who are in college. Those who might want to pursue a career in as a police officer and beyond, what do you say to them? What should they do?
Well, we try and grab kids as young as possible and try and bring them up in the culture so we can recruit them as as soon as they're old enough. But I mean, really, it's about choices. We try and intervene now. We have mentoring programs that start with fifth graders because we find that, and I'm a good example. Young people start making bad choices around 11, 12, 13. That's when the common sense factor starts to drop off a little bit.
Right.
And so we try and start influencing these kids we mentor at that age to make good choices. So in other words, if you're 14 years old and your friend who's 14 years old pulls up in a car that he doesn't own a car, doesn't have a license, and probably not his car, for you to get in the car with him is probably not a good choice.
Right.
Something bad could probably come out of that.
Right.
So just kind of that choices, using good judgment mentality. And that continues once you get older and going off to college. I have the same debate with my son, who I'm not sure it worked completely. But, you have to make good choices. And, the choices you make today impact your future tomorrow. And, some people just unfortunately get caught up in bad choices very early.
Let me share, leading into my next question, let me share something, an observation I've made actually here at Busboys and Poets, sort of about the culture here. The guy who leads this, the visionary, the owner, Andy Shalal, he has instituted a program where he brings all of his employees together at some intervals during the week, during the month, whatever it is. And he talks to them about culture, and he talks to them about race, and what is at the center of what he's trying to do is to sensitize everybody, whether they're black, white, Hispanic, Native American, doesn't really matter, to sensitize them about the humanity of those that don't look like them, which manifests, that kind of training manifests itself in his restaurants, where these are like, you find as much, if not more, diversity in the Busboys and Poets restaurants, because everybody comes in, feels comfortable. And part of the reason they feel comfortable is because those who wait on them and take care of them, look out for them when they're in that environment, have really embraced the idea of sensitivity and, a lack of discrimination or any kind of bias of those
right.
kinds of things. What is the Metropolitan Police Department doing to try to get to that point?
I mean, obviously, we go through a lot of the sensitivity trainings in terms of culture. It's not just race. It's everything. It's culture. It's appearance. It's gender. So we do a lot of that type of training. But really, the key is you got to start with the recruitment. I mean, there are people. There are ways to try and start off by hiring the right people that have the right attitude, the right mentality. People that grow up in very diverse communities, this community, people that grow up in our own community here, are much more likely to be very effective police officers. They grew up here. They know the culture. They know that. So I said to you when you asked about my childhood, I said, we had fights in school, but they were neighborhood-based fights, just like today. That's just the culture of Washington, isn't it, right? We fight with other neighborhoods. That's what we do. So it made it very easy for me when I'm dealing with rival neighborhood disputes that result in violence. This is what I grew up with. So I think the important thing is we can do all the sensitivity training, but really to try and bring in people from our community here in Washington and employ them as police officers. And we try and recruit from the high schools with our cadet program. And we're now doing the mentoring programs with 5th and 6th graders because we want to get them up there into the high school program so we can pull them in then. But that's really the key. It's not about training. You can't train out bias.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I got a whole bunch of more questions, not enough time to ask them all. You, police chief, major metropolitan city, one of the few females to hold that kind of title and responsibility. Talk to me, please, about what has been your journey and struggle, if there has been one, in a male-dominated field.
When I started, believe it or not, this is a statistic that a lot of people don't know. In my lifetime, women in the Metropolitan Police Department and in policing around the country were not allowed to patrol and uniform marked cars with men. They were not allowed to do that here in Washington, D.C. until 1973.
Okay.
1973. Uh-huh. And I was born in 67. So in my lifetime, we've gone from not being allowed to to patrol in a marked police car with men to me being the chief. So that's a pretty big jump in progression for women.
Right. And so you're saying that. Let me say to my producers, we're not going to take this next break. We're going to go right to the top of the hour before we take the break. So thank you very much. Just you're saying that 1973. A female police officer could not ride in the car with a male police officer. And I want to highlight that. For those of you who scream to go back to the good old days, is that what you want to go to? Let's stay
But it was, it was tough. Women were not fully accepted in policing when I started in the early 90s. There was a lot of sexual harassment, because you were such an extreme minority. Women were such an extreme minority. We were subject to a lot of harassment, and still there was a mentality from some that women didn't belong in policing. I don't see that today. I see a tremendous change, at least not in Washington, D.C., maybe in some smaller areas, but Washington, D.C. is very progressive, and really in policing it all comes down to this. Are you a good police officer or are you not? If you're not a good police officer, cops don't want to work with you, they don't want to listen to you, and they don't want to follow you. Right. I've got 24 years here. I've done all I could do to be a good police officer while I was here. I worked hard. I did make a lot of arrests. I hate to tell you, but I made a lot of arrests when I was out there, but those were the days when crime was much higher. So that's really all that matters. So I think for me, it's not really been that much of a struggle. Once I got beyond those, early years where the harassment was pretty.
You said you made a lot of arrests. You ever had to actually pull your gun out?
I have.
You ever shot anybody?
I have not shot anybody. For people who know me, this is shocking, but I actually had to shoot a dog. And I'm a dog lover, but I was attacked by two pit bulls, so I actually had to shoot a dog, but I've never had to shoot anybody.
Wow.
But I've had to, draw my firearm several times in my career, especially in the early days.
Uh-huh. What was the most memorable situation that you came upon? Does something stand out beyond the rest that, is absolute top of mind? It's 24 years. I know there have been a lot of moments. Is there one particular moment that was most frightening, most interesting that just stands out?
Well, there's a lot. I think the ones that stick with you the most are the most horrifying, and certainly not. There's all of the worst ones you never forget. Children, elderly folks, violent crime that impact kids is probably the worst. But interesting-wise, I used to tell people my job is like going to the movies every day sometimes. Because you see stuff that the average person won't see. And I remember in the height of the crack cocaine epidemic. Literally, a woman ran down and stopped me at a traffic light and grabbed my arm through the window and says, I need your help, and she pulls me out of the car. I was over Minnesota Avenue. And up the steps, it was snowing out, up the steps to an apartment building off of Minnesota Avenue. And when I got there, I was so focused on this woman, the environment she's playing in. There's another woman who's smoking a cigarette, and she's bent over with her hands on her knees. And I said, what's wrong? And she says, I need help. And this woman had literally delivered a baby. The baby was laying in the snow between her feet.
Oh, my God.
She didn't know she was pregnant. Obviously, this is a woman who was a drug user. So she's just walking down the sidewalk.
She delivered a baby?
She's walking down the sidewalk, gets a cramp, pulls her pants down, and drops this little premature baby. And she still was not even coherent enough to realize what was going on. So to try and pick that baby up, and the baby was premature, but breathing. Yeah. And I thought to myself, just from the woman's demeanor, how fortunate that child would be to survive, and what.
Do you know if the baby survived?
The baby did survive, at least initially. The baby was about 3 months premature, but did survive. But, what the life of that child was going to be after. So that was one of the things that stick with you, just how amazing drug use and the crack cocaine was, and what impact it had on communities, because you would see over and over and over again the impact on children.
Mm-hmm. Okay. To let you know that I'm not being discriminatory here, I'll give you a little background. Mayor Gray was here the weekend that Nikki Giovanni was here, and it was Nikki Giovanni Day, July the 13th. The Deltas were in town. And so a lot of the Deltas, that's your person out there, Gwendolyn. Mayor Gray, so a lot of the Deltas were in town, and a lot of the Deltas were single. And they heard that the mayor was single. So, I mean, I got a whole bunch of push to ask the mayor, was he an eligible bachelor? And so when I posted on Facebook that Kathy Lanier was coming on, I got a lot of reaction. Some of it public, on Facebook posts, and some of it private. And a couple of them was, man, she's fine as hell. And I heard that she wasn't married. So, what's your situation? Blush.
I am not married, but I do have a boyfriend. So.
Oh, you got fellas?
I am not married.
Fellas and a couple of the ladies too. That's your answer. Fellas and a couple of y'all ladies. You know who I'm talking about. That's our answer. Please tell me, what's in the future for Kathy Lanier?
As in post police chief?
As in, well, how long you gonna be the police chief, and what any aspirations? We hear that the top spot might be something that's in your sights, as in to become mayor one day.
Oh no politics, not politics.
Oh really?
No, not my thing. I really don't know. I mean, I get asked that question a lot, and I wish I had this brilliant answer, but my job takes a lot of my time, and I like to focus on what I'm doing. I've been a part of the Metropolitan Police Department my whole adult life.
Right.
24 years. So this is what I've been doing most of my life, and I love doing it. I'll do it as long as I feel like I'm effective and people want me here. What I'm going to do next, I don't know. I get asked a lot if I want to go to another big city and be a police chief. Do I want to move on to federal or private sector? I really haven't made any of those decisions because I really want to focus on what I'm doing here. When I'm done here, then I'll start looking around and see what else is out there for me.
You came in, Fenty
Yes.
appointed you in. Mm-hmm. And so any big difference you see between the style and the relationship with
Fenty
and Gray?
The relationship is not very different. The style is night and day. They're two very different type of leaders, but both effective. I mean, I think if you look at my interaction with both of the mayors were very, very, very in tune to public safety. Both of them are very concerned about public safety. And I have always felt like both mayors have supported the priorities that the police department felt were needed to keep our community safe. So I've been very fortunate. Both mayors, although extremely different in style, very, very in tune to public safety.
Uh-huh. And Vince Gray, as I said, is a bachelor. Adrian Fenty is about to become a bachelor. And he also might become, well, let me just put it this way. I understand that he and Steve Jobs' wife are having a hot, torrid love affair. And there are a whole lot of men out there that's real jealous that he's dating a woman worth $10 billion.
I heard that.
Yeah. So you definitely know politics, because I'm telling you, where does that rumor come from?
A lot of people ask. A lot of people ask me about it, but it's just really not. I just don't have any desire to get involved in politics. I think a lot of people appreciate that when I speak, I kind of just very blunt and to the point, and they like that from a police chief. Mm-hmm. Now, if I was a politician, you think they'd like that?
Yeah, I understand.
No, they wouldn't.
Yeah,
they would hate me.
Right. And I loved having you here. I know I loved having you here as our guest.
Thank you.
We're going to wrap this segment up. We'll be back with our surprise mystery guest when we return at Busboys and Poets, live on the Rock Newman Show.
My baby drives a bull handcuff.
The weekend is here, and no matter what the weather's like outside, you'll find the deals inside here in the beautiful showroom of the all-new Pohanka Hyundai in Capitol Heights during their giant Markdown Madness sale.
Smart shoppers know that every new Hyundai in Pohanka comes with Hyundai Assurance and America's best 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty. But why don't you tell them about the Markdown sale, Joe?
I'll be happy to, Kim. Folks, shop around on the web, and you'll see lease payments on a new 2013 Elantra GLS at $179 a month. Today at Pohanka Hyundai, $99 a month. That's right, a $99 payment on a brand new Elantra.
And $89 a month on a new 2013 Accent GLS Automatic. How do they do it, Joe?
It must be the volume, Kim. A brand new building, hundreds of new Hyundais, and Pohanka's low payment and easy credit programs are designed to get everybody driving. But you have to get here today. Rush to the giant Markdown Madness sale at exit 13 off the Capitol Beltway.
Pohanka Hyundai, king of the Beltway. All financing for a limited term on approved HMF credit.
My baby drives a bull handcuff.
I just want to lay next to you for a while.
My baby drives a bull handcuff. My baby drives a bull handcuff.
The weekend is here, and no matter what the weather's like outside, you'll find the deals inside here in the beautiful showroom of the all-new Pohanka Hyundai in Capitol Heights during their giant Markdown Madness sale.
Smart shoppers know that every new Hyundai in Pohanka comes with Hyundai Assurance and 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty. But why don't you tell them about the Markdown sale, Joe?
I'll be happy to, Kim. Folks, shop around on the web, and you'll see lease payments on a new 2013 Elantra GLS at $179 a month. Today at Pohanka Hyundai, $99 a month. That's right, a $99 payment on a brand new Elantra.
And $89 a month on a new 2013 Accent GLS Automatic. How do they do it, Joe?
It must be the volume, Kim. A brand new building, hundreds of new Hyundais, and Pohanka's low payment and easy credit programs are designed to get everybody driving. But you have to get here today. Rush to the giant Markdown Madness sale at exit 13 off the Capitol Beltway.
Pohanka Hyundai, king of the Beltway. All financing for a limited term on approved HMF credit.
My baby drives a bull handcuff.
Hello to all my friends in the DMV. I am Rock Newman from the Rock Newman Show. I want to tell you about the MGM Grand National Harbor, the most exciting project to come to the District, Maryland, or Virginia in quite some time. You're going to have great fun. Come on down, support this project with all you have. It is going to be wonderful for the area. We're going to increase our tax base. We're going to get funding for the police department, for ambulance, for fire, for education. It is really a project that is going to benefit our area. Folks, we want to support in a very strong DMV kind of way this great project from the MGM Grand National Harbor. Hello, everybody. I'm Rock Newman from The Rock Newman Show. And I am absolutely flattered to have as one of my fine advertisers the DMV's greatest corporate citizen. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about the Pohanka Automotive Group. If you have any automotive needs whatsoever, if you want to sell your car, buy a car, trade in your car, have your car serviced, whatever you need, see my good friends at the Pohanka Automotive Group. You will be well taken care of, I promise. I'm Rock Newman. I might be there. Come on down and see our good friends at Pohanka Automotive Group.
And now, the Rock Newman Show.
Welcome back, folks, to the Rock Newman Show. And for the rest of this show here, I will be drinking my water. This is H2O, agua, from the cup that Police Chief Kathy Lanier left. Thank you very, very much, Chief. Today is August the 10th. Let me remind you, Saturday, another spectacular, beautiful day in Washington, D.C. We're broadcasting live from Busboys and Poets. We're on the stage of the Langston Hughes Room, and I just keep on loving to say that. I told you that we had a surprise guest. And, you know, let me set this up this way, that for decades and decades and decades and decades, within, in particular, the African-American community, but also in the historic preservation community, there's a place in the Big Easy, New Orleans, that Treme, the place, there's a neighborhood there. It's called Treme. You know, in New Orleans, they have those things. They say Treme and beignet. And, you know, it looks like beignet, but it's beignet. Well, Treme has, as I said, for decades been thought of as the oldest African-American neighborhood in the United States of America. And our next guest here has a little something to say about that. He's going to teach us a little bit today. And teaching is very much one of the many things he's qualified to do. I am talking about Morgan State University professor Dale Green. Professor Green, welcome to the Rock Newman Show. Okay, so we talk about Treme being the oldest African-American neighborhood in the United States. Now, recently, there were reports about the work that you've done, and for those of you who know, he heads up the Department of Architecture and Historical Preservation at Morgan State University. And someone's got to be really special to be on this show for Morgan State because, you know, we're Howard people over her. But Professor Green I found to be extremely fascinating. And he has some information that, first of all, I thought it should have been a lot bigger story than it was. It actually, I saw it in the Washington Post. But why don't we go, and let me just say, I don't want to steal any thunder, but there is a community in Maryland, on the eastern shore of Maryland, Talbot County, that we now understand that you and your team have been able to determine that predates as an African American community Treme
Yes.
by many years.
Yes.
What you say?
Yes. Well, we have been very fortunate to uncover in recent times what we now know to be America's oldest free black neighborhood that has been continuously occupied and inhabited for decades and decades and decades prior to Treme. Treme celebrated last year its bicentennial. So it was founded in 1812. The neighborhood that we've been working in and have had several archaeological excavations in has taken us back to the American Revolutionary War. This neighborhood was founded somewhere around 1770. So we have to be careful to say it's not the earliest African-American neighborhood. However, it is certainly the oldest African-American neighborhood. And what's important about that is that...
And you're saying free.
And free. There should be a strong emphasis on the fact that this was free.
And this is 1770.
This is 1770. And what largely gave rise to that was a very significant Quaker population in Maryland, and in particular in Talbot County going back to the 1600s. And it was the Quakers who were early in manumitting their slave population, because the Quakers did, in fact, own
Did you
slaves.
say manumitting?
Manumitting.
Manumitting?
Yes,
What's
freeing
that?
them.
I was going to say,
Absolutely.
what that mean?
Yeah, freeing them. And the Quakers did indeed own several slaves, and they owned a lot of them, and they were the first to, again, begin to emancipate
Just hold
them.
on. Give me that word again. What is it?
Manumissions, manumitting.
Manumitting.
Or emancipating them.
Okay.
Or
All right.
freeing
I
them.
never heard that before.
All synonyms.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right.
And
Okay.
so the Quakers were very extraordinary in that regards in terms of doing that. However, there were others that were also contributing to this.
Let me just ask you a question about that. That the Quakers owned slaves.
Yes.
And then they were they started manumitting them. They started freeing them.
And let me tell you why they started doing that.
That's what I was going to ask. That's what I was going to ask.
There were two very influential Quakers who came on foot journeys, which essentially meant that they came down to Maryland's eastern shore from various places, including England. And they would walk through areas like Talbot County, which had a very robust slave population. And they would wear dye clothing, and they would wear this dye clothing because that clothing wasn't produced by slaves. So these were abolitionists who were serious. They walked the walk, they talked the talk, and they would talk to these Quaker meeting houses like Third Haven and Peach Blossom and what have you. And it took a couple years in order for this to take real effect. They came in 1740, and they came back in 1760. And it wasn't until 1770 that we actually began to see those records indicating that, in fact, these meeting houses were, in fact, freeing, manumitting, or emancipating that slave population. And so that's what gave rise to the Hill neighborhood, which is the name of this oldest African-American neighborhood that we've come to learn in the country here, which happens to be located in Maryland, which had the second largest free black population in the country in 1790. And so this area really constituted the largest free black population in the Chesapeake region. There were more free blacks in this neighborhood than there were in Baltimore. There were more free blacks densely populated in this neighborhood than there were slaves on the largest plantation in that area, which was the White House Plantation that owned Frederick Douglass. There were only 346 slaves on that plantation. And there were over 410 in the area in which we've uncovered this work. And so this has been something that's been well under the radar for, decades. However, we've
centuries.
Centuries, we must say. Right. Although there are those that live in the community who have lived there as free blacks going back all the way to 1790 when the United States had its first federal census and recorded white persons and black persons and what have you. Those records indicate these families, list their names. Those same families live in this neighborhood in 2013. And so nowhere else can we find that kind of longevity to a neighborhood without it being gentrified, obliterated, or what have you. And so,
is the Hill today still an African American community?
The Hill today is still a African American community.
So, here's what I'm just baffled. I'm baffled by all of our learned behavior and all of our technology and all of our history and all of our, colleges.
Sure.
Why haven't we known this before? How did that go undiscovered? Something so obvious.
Sure, absolutely.
I mean, I was so excited about having you on this program, man, because I have a lot of questions to ask about this, and I'm fascinated by it. And one of the things, I have a dear friend in New Orleans. His name is Don Hubbard, and he owns the Hubbard Mansion on St. Charles Avenue, which is the first black-owned business there. So we often talk about and compare and compete, and I always like to have one up on him.
Yes.
Man, when I read this here and knew that you were coming on the show, Don Hubbard is watching right now. So we want to clearly establish beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Hill,
that's right,
significantly in years predates Treme.
That's correct.
Don Hubbard, this is for you.
That's right. That's correct.
How did it remain a secret?
Well, sure. There are two things that I often talk about with this, and one is I say that this has very much been a product of the story of disbelief. Many persons, whether white or black, would disbelieve that there would have been a neighborhood existing during the time that this existed of free blacks.
Yes.
And not just a pocket of a neighborhood where blacks were set aside to live, but some of the richest African-American families that were in the state of Maryland in 1790 lived in this community. There were free blacks like Joseph Chain, who was fluent in French, who had 5 businesses on Washington Street, which is a street that was, in fact, named after George Washington, as he commissioned.
What was his name? What was his name?
This African-American's name was Joseph Chain. Chain like Chain.
Joseph Chain.
And he was a early founder of the community, as well as a early founder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is there and the oldest on Maryland's Eastern Shore, and again, birthed in that particular community. And he had several businesses that range from grocery stores during that time where both whites and blacks purchased products from there. He also had a barber shop for which he served the white gentry. He did house calls to persons like Robert Goldsboro, who were of the Thomas Jefferson and George Washington caliber.
So let me ask you a question. So this is a free black man.
Yes.
And he's cutting the white people's hair, the gentry.
And selling them blades, which is really important back then.
And selling them blades.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
and persons like Johns Hopkins.
So some white people trusted this brother with that blade to sit in that chair.
Precisely.
Okay, all right.
Precisely.
Okay.
And so you had all of these things going on, and many of them lived beside some of the wealthy white persons that actually lived in and around the neighborhood. So this was very much, again, as I said, a story of disbelief, because if you come to the area, the architecture and the built environment still reflects the period of significance. And many persons would look at these houses and they'd say, well, black people didn't live in those houses. We still have that problem in 2013. When I give tours through the neighborhood and I point clearly at the structures that I know persons would doubt, they are so shocked to learn that African Americans lived in this stately brick federal period house from 1790, and that they in fact lived there for decades and decades and decades, and many of them still live in those same houses. Some have transitioned into white ownership or what have you, but these are the things that people disbelieve. The other thing that contributes to it is that I say often that there are 2 types of mentalities. There's a come here mentality, persons that move to an area from somewhere else, and then there's the from here mentality. And those are the persons that have been there, as I mentioned, from 1770 or
Right.
the 1790s period. And this is all just an everyday experience to them. So
Ain't
it's
no
like,
big deal.
yeah, sure, this is the hill. This is where we live. You know,
Ain't no
we
thing.
didn't know it was
Chicken
America's
wing.
oldest or
Right.
what have you. And
Right.
exactly. And so
Right.
with all of those things coupled together, we've overlooked this. We all have overlooked it. I've said often it's not just a black story, it's
Yeah.
an American
Yes,
story.
it
This
is.
is a
Yes, it
reflection
is.
of how whites and blacks work together. This place would have never existed if they hadn't have been patronized by the white community. This is how Christians and Quakers work together. This place would have never come into formation had it not been for the Quaker population. So again, I think the more we can talk about what united us versus what divided us, we can get closer to these chapters of our history, which have been yet to be written.
Yeah. Let me ask. So there was the hill.
There was the hill.
There were mamas and daddies.
Yes.
Which meant that babies were being born.
That's right.
Now, talk to me about what you know and understand about whether or not, I like something that comes to mind for me is, do we know who like the first formally trained doctor was? I'm sure there were midwives and babies being born, so babies were being born and somebody was there while they were being born.
Yes.
Now, do we have any information on that?
What an excellent question. I'm always honored to talk about, we call her Amazing Grace. Her name was Grace Brooks, and she was this individual that you're talking about. She was born in 1740, and in 1788, she does something very, very extraordinary, and in fact is one of the first in the country to do this. She emancipates herself, her children, and her grandchildren in one transaction for 70 pounds. In 1788, 70 years prior to the Emancipation Proclamation.
Okay, let me ask you. So it makes me think right away. Grace Brooks.
Yes.
Emancipated herself.
And her children. And her grandchildren.
Now,
All
do
at
you
once.
know if she was an offspring of a slave master, or do you have any idea of her parentage?
We do not, although it is very likely, based on how she's described and based on how she was perhaps brought up on the plantation in which she was enslaved.
Right.
It is very likely that she is a product of the slave master.
Because, I know there are a lot of Brookses out there.
Oh, absolutely.
And I asked that question because if you had told me she was a very dark-skinned Brooks, my first girlfriend was a very dark-skinned Brooks. Her name was Ivia Brooks. And so probably not necessarily have that lineage there.
Maybe.
Not necessarily.
You never know.
We don't. And I'm telling you, what you're sharing with us today sort of, it certainly opens my eyes up, and I'm hoping that it opens up the eyes of others. So please go on and tell me. She
Sure.
liberated herself and her children.
And her children and her grandchildren.
And her grandchildren.
And she did this for 70 pounds. So one question is, where does a African-American female who was a slave in 1788 and prior get 70 pounds, which is a substantial amount of money
yes.
in 1788? And doing this 70 years prior to the Emancipation Proclamation. And doing that 3 transactions in one. It was a big deal to emancipate yourself.
Right.
But to get your children and also to get your grandchildren is quite extraordinary, and not one record has surfaced for that ever happening in America. So she is probably the first person, regardless of color, who had ever done so. And she does that and moves into this community after she leaves the plantation. And by 1792,
Moves into the community of the Hill.
she purchases her own home as single head of her household. And that house is a house that still stands, for which persons can come and see. Wow. And it is fully documented. However, it had never had any attachments to her. So the history of that house has always been praised for its European architecture, if you will, and for being one of the oldest structures in the town of Easton, but never affiliated with this rich woman named Grace Brooks, who was a free African American, who purchased her freedom, for which her records had always existed. No one knew about them. Her own
So-
descendants had no idea who she was.
Okay, so just keeping it basic and going back, where did she get the 70 pounds? Is there a determination of that?
We have no records to support where she received the 70 pounds.
Okay.
Obviously, the records indicate and verify, in fact, that she paid the
for it,
70
right.
pounds, so she certainly had it. But how she earned that money
Right.
is
Then
unknown.
so then not so many years later, she moves into this
She moves to the Hill.
to this grand
and-
home.
Precisely. And she's a midwife in the community.
I mean, because that's how we started. I was saying about the doctor.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely. And she's serving the white and the black community.
Uh-huh.
And she is very liked in the community. She, at her death in 1810, she is one of the first, again, women, not just black or white, but women to have an obituary. Women wouldn't have had an obituary, so to speak, in 1810. And she has a full-page obituary, which really helps us to understand who she was in the community and exactly what she did. She's likened in that obituary to Benjamin Banneker, who works with LaFont to lay out the plan of Washington, D.C.,
Right,
for
right.
which didn't exist during the era that we're talking about all of this history.
Sure.
And she's likened to Phyllis Wheatley,
Yes.
who is one of the first African-American poets. And we're sitting down in the space of Langston Hughes. in
Hello.
A later period. But she's also talked about as being of sable hue and not being black and not being dark and not being a Negro and what have you. So they talk about her in ways that are so eloquent and in ways that make her a human being for which other African Americans would not have been spoken of as such.
Right.
And so she was quite a remarkable, and as I said, as she's often being referred to, a amazing grace. And so we are so privileged to have uncovered her legacy and to be able to share now with the world as we remember this place as the Hill.
As the Hill. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound.
Absolutely.
You're going to hear us when we come. We're going to hear our sound when we come back after these messages on the Rock Newman Show. We're with Professor Dale Green from the Architecture and Historic Preservation Department at Morgan State University. We'll be back in a moment.
My baby drives a pro handcuff.
The weekend is here, and no matter what the weather's like outside, you'll find the deals inside here in the beautiful showroom of the all-new Pohanka Hyundai in Capitol Heights during their giant Markdown Madness sale.
Smart shoppers know that every new Hyundai in Pohanka comes with Hyundai Assurance and America's best 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty. But why don't you tell them about the markdown sale, Joe?
I'll be happy to, Kim. Folks, shop around on the web, and you'll see lease payments on a new 2013 Elantra GLS at $179 a month. Today at Pohanka Hyundai, $99 a month. That's right, a $99 payment on a brand new Elantra.
And $89 a month on a new 2013 Accent GLS Automatic. How do they do it, Joe?
It must be the volume, Kim. A brand new building, hundreds of new Hyundais, and Pohanka's low payment and easy credit programs are designed to get everybody driving. But you have to get here today. Rush to the giant Markdown Madness sale at exit 13 off the Capitol Beltway.
Pohanka Hyundai, king of the Beltway. All financing for a limited term on approved HMF credit.
My baby drives a pro handcuff.
Hello to all my friends in the DMV. I am Rock Newman from the Rock Newman Show. I want to tell you about the MGM Grand National Harbor, the most exciting project to come to the District, Maryland, or Virginia in quite some time. You're going to have great fun. Come on down, support this project with all you have. It is going to be wonderful for the area. We're going to increase our tax base. We're going to get funding for the police department, for ambulance, for fire, for education. It is really a project that is going to benefit our area. Folks, we want to support in a very strong DMV kind of way this great project from the MGM Grand National Harbor.
And now, the Rock Newman Show.
Folks, we're back on the Rock Newman Show today, August the 10th, 2013, broadcasting live from Busboys and Poets at 14th V Street, Northwest Washington, D.C. My just absolutely fascinating guest, I said he's going to be a surprise guest. I really should have said fascinating, because he just has a fascinating story to share with us. And that is the I'm gonna call it the latter day discovery of the oldest African American neighborhood in the country. And if my math is right, this is like 1770. We know that this community existed, and Tremay was 1812.
Yes.
Tremay, we know, dates back to 1812. So Don Hubbard, 42 years before you, bro, us folks up here in the DMV, DC, Maryland, and Virginia had a neighborhood. Tell me, okay, so we're talking about Grace Brooks.
Yes.
And Grace was a midwife. She liberated herself. Again, by the way, this is Professor Dale Green from Morgan State University. Grace Brooks, midwife, liberated herself. What was her profession as we know it that of a midwife, or did she do other things also?
She did other things for which we are not able to really quite understand, because there are no records for what exactly she did beyond being a midwife.
Right.
But one of the things that we're able to use to fill the gaps is archaeology. So part of our process and the historical research in terms of how we've been uncovering this rich story, in terms of using oral history, genealogy, land records, archaeology, and other historical records, the archaeology really fills the holes in the stories like this. When someone would ask, well, what else did Grace Brooks do? And we don't have documents that support that. We don't have oral history that can begin to speak to that. When we begin to excavate at that property where Grace Brooks lived, where we know that she lived there through land records, tax assessments, and et cetera, we can then find through the material culture and the artifacts that are uncovered, because the artifacts are always very richly preserved, less than 6 inches below the earth, all across the country, all across the cultural landscape, if you will.
Right.
And so we will begin to evaluate those artifacts and interpret them according to other material culture and historical documents that we have, to begin to depict what exactly she was doing in addition to being a midwife.
Right.
So we haven't gotten to that point with Grace Brooks. We've been able to do that with some others in the neighborhood. We've just not gotten to her site yet to archaeologically excavate it. We plan to do that actually summer 2014.
Okay, just about her for a second. Her descendants.
Yes.
Exist?
Her descendants exist.
You're in touch with them?
They live in the community. They continue to go to the same church after 195 years. So they are very much alive. Many were not familiar with her at all. They had no idea who she was, or in fact that she was even an ancestor of theirs, or that anybody in their family had ever achieved anything of that level of significance. So this has been very exciting and very rewarding for those that, again, as I said, were the from-heres who didn't really understand how significant their neighborhood was, their legacy was, and what have you.
Well, let me tell you what the Rock Newman Show is going to do. And I can say this because I'm the executive producer of the Rock Newman Show, you see. The Rock Newman Show is going to come across the Chesapeake Bay Bridge into that area now that is just generally and commonly referred to
As Easton.
We're going to work something out where we come over there and we do a broadcast from there. Now, whether it's her house or some other point that galvanizes the community, here's what we'd like to do. We'd like to come over there and try to, in advance, identify as many of the descendants who trace back to the time of Grace Brooks and her contemporaries and have them in a room. That's what we want to do.
Well, I want you to do that.
All right.
That sounds great.
Well, I'm going to tell you just right now, and we're going to make a big deal about it. You know what? Because this is a story that's absolutely not just the Eastern Maryland story,
That's right.
Eastern Shore of Maryland story, a DMV story.
That's right.
This is a national story. This is a national story.
This is a national to international story.
Yes.
There's another component. There's many components.
It
to this I
absolutely
haven't
is, because
shared
you
yet.
talked about the Quakers coming in.
Well, there's another piece.
And the timing being around the Revolutionary War and all of that. And the Revolutionary War didn't happen because, there had something to do, the Boston Tea Party had something to do with taxation without representation.
That's right.
So that taxation with representation was coming from folks that was across the water.
Correct.
So there's the international component to this.
And there's a very known, documented international connection to Africa. So oftentimes we will just loosely talk about the slaves coming from Africa with no real record of exactly where they came from, who went and got them, exactly what ship they were on, and etc. And for Easton, and for this neighborhood in particular, by way of Jeremiah Banning, who was a sea captain and white, went to Senegal, Africa, handpicked his 21 slaves, brought them back to Easton.
Hold on,
and
1 second
today
right
I
there.
have his login will in his own handwriting recording who they were. So we know exactly who they were, where they were on the hill, and who their descendants are.
Folks,
and that's very
look,
rare.
look, pardon me. Pardon me, I try to be humble, but I don't have enough humility not to say this. This is the kind of stuff you get on the Rock Newman Show, and when you come out here and have a wonderful breakfast at Busboys and Poets at 14th and V Street, Northwest Washington, D.C., this is the kind of food and nourishment that your mind gets. I absolutely love. I love this story. Tell us more about, what's Jeremiah?
Jeremiah Banning.
Yeah.
Jeremiah Banning was a very interesting and prominent figure in, we should say, America, but to bring it local to Maryland and Easton and Talbot County in particular. He was commissioned by George Washington and Thomas Jefferson to lay out the town of Easton. And we have the actual certificates that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson signed to have him do that. So Easton has a Washington Street because of Jeremiah Banning and George Washington being close colleagues. Jeremiah Banning is this individual that I mentioned among many hats that he wore as slave master and surveyor, and the list went on and on and on, was a sea captain who also, as I mentioned, got on his ship and went over to Senegal, Africa, and got these 21 slaves and brought them back to Easton.
Right.
There was something very unusual about the relationship that he had with these 21 slaves in particular. The fact that he writes about all 21 of them, at least a page, their name, characteristics about them, and when he manumits them, he doesn't just do what some of the other slave masters do when they sign a manumission and emancipate them and you are hereby now free. He looks into their future. He deeds them property for what's known today as the Banning lots. And descendants from those Bannings, which he had named after himself, from that era of 1790 to 2013, continue to live on the Banning lots on the hill. Miss Rosalie Banning was 104 years old when she died in 2004, one of the descendants of the original Banning still living on the same property. for which the others still live there. So this is an amazing story, as I mentioned, not only just holding the distinction as America's oldest neighborhood, but also having the same people who have continuously inhabited that area occupying that area today. So when you come down, you will see those same persons who have the same DNA from those that came from Senegal, Africa, that show up on the first United States federal census in America, and also live there today with the same built environment that reflects that. We don't find that kind of cultural landscape all throughout America. As I mentioned, there were neighborhoods that certainly predated this, so it's not the earliest,
Right.
but those neighborhoods have been obliterated. Those neighborhoods have been gentrified. We wouldn't be able to uncover the culture and history that we've been able to uncover and will continue to uncover for the next 5 years on the Hill.
Yeah. Let me ask, are you aware of any genealogy pursuits from those that we know that Banning brought over from Senegal? Has there been any trace back to their brothers and sisters in Senegal? Anything? Are we aware of that at all?
We're not aware of that. It's probably too early for me to share a
No, it's not.
a real
No, it's not.
groundbreaking
It ain't too
piece.
early.
But I
Come
will.
on with it.
I have a way of sharing it without sharing it,
Yeah,
if you will.
Ain't nobody watching.
I shall say that a very noted Harvard University professor, who is probably the leading authority on African American genealogy, is extremely interested.
You talking about that one that police? I mean,
and personally
I had
working
heard.
with us on this rich history, and has visited the area.
Right.
And soon, I believe, we will be able to answer those questions.
Well, I know you're not talking about Dr. Henry Louis Gates, but you're probably talking about somebody else. So maybe we can get him involved also. You think?
I think.
Okay. Man, this kind of work doesn't happen without some significant funding.
Yes.
How are we getting this done? What's
Sure.
the gas that going? How are we getting the gas that going? That's
Sure,
going in
absolutely.
the tank?
Well, we have been successful in raising now nearly $400,000.
Okay.
Much of which has been through the support of philanthropic efforts locally there in Talbot County. However, other Marylanders have contributed financially to this project. The governor of the good state of Maryland has been very supportive of our project. We've received over $150,000 from the governor's commission. We've received monies from the National Trusts for Historic Preservation, and the list goes on and on and on. So between private dollars, state or federal dollars, local level foundations and what have you, they've all been very supportive. Volunteer efforts and hours from those that are in the community and beyond that are contributing to the project. And then the support of our various institutions. Morgan State University is leading this effort, but we're working with our sister institutions like the University of Maryland at College Park, and we're working with Salisbury University and the University of Maryland and Eastern Shore and Washington College and so forth. So it's a very large team composite for a very large, chapter of our history for which has been unwritten and undiscovered. So,
Folks, we're being taught here today by Professor Dale Green. Professor, he's with Morgan State University and, as he said, the Architectural and Historic Preservation Unit. Where did you grow up?
in Easton, Maryland.
And when you were growing up in Easton, Maryland?
Knew nothing about any of this. And coincidentally, my grandparents, who are in Easton, Maryland and are 96 years old, never shared this until we started working on the project, and my grandparents have been married now for 73 years. And they mentioned 73 years ago, they were courting and dating each other on the Hill.
On the Hill.
So so again, it goes back to that the from heres have always sort of known aspects of this history.
Right.
But it was just, this is what we did.
Right.
I met your grandfather on the Hill, but it's not a big deal.
So how did you become interested in this field of study?
Well, for me, as I say, I share often sometimes Sir Winston Churchill's quote on, "We shape our buildings and they thereafter shape us." I was always very interested in how America had been shaped from a built environment standpoint. And of course, the historic built environments were always of most interest to me in particular as an architect. And so my interest actually start obviously in this community and beyond as I grew up on Maryland's Eastern Shore and was educated in the public school systems there and what have you. And then, of course, as I went on to undergraduate school and graduate school and what have you, I continued to further that interest and what have you. But the things that were around us in the physical environment, if you will, the built and natural environment were the things that inspired me and motivated me. And so beyond art, architecture is considered often the mother art. It was that path that was really inspiring to me.
Let me ask you a question. Off subject a little bit, but I'm fascinated by all of this. I spoke this week with folks down in another part of Maryland. There's been a fascinating discovery of whale bones.
Yes.
They seem to have the entire whale. And the discovery of this whale on the cliffs of where Robert E. Lee resided, the way that they determined this is that it's somewhere that whale is 15 million years old.
Yes.
Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with that. I have not been following that, but there are close ties to, if you will, the history of that whale and similarly the history of this story in terms of preservation.
Yes.
In terms of how something like a whale that's 15 million years old or more can be uncovered in 2013 and still be so richly preserved that one could interpret as they will go forward, not only what type of whale it is, but what that whale ate, where that whale came from. Similarly, we are able to do the same things with this kind of historical and cultural aspect of our history. That's the beauty of science and technology coming together around the things that are seemingly just, ordinary.
And what I'd like for you to do for me, and this just ain't just for the audience because I don't necessarily understand it either, tell me about that. You'll get an artifact somewhere 6, 8, 12 inches beneath the soil, in the soil.
Yes.
You'll take that artifact and then do with it to determine what?
Sure. So let me share one of the most significant artifacts that had been uncovered in recent times as part of the archaeological excavation. There was a 1794 1-cent coin.
And this was at the hill?
This was on the hill.
On the hill. Mm-hmm.
It's a very large coin to be 1 cent, but again, it goes back to 1794. And it's a Liberty coin. It's a coin that symbolized freedom, and it comes from ancient Greece. And what was important about this coin, in particular to this neighborhood, was that it was found in the yard, in the excavations, of a house that was built in 1793.
Okay.
And the coin dates to 1794. But where the coin was found, because to sort of break down this archaeology, if you will, is that in that test pit, there are various layers. So as I mentioned, less than 6 inches below the earth or grade or the grass or what have you, we can find these kind of artifacts. But we go down when persons would ask, how far do you go down? You go down until you don't find anything else. So that may be 3 feet, it could be 12 feet.
Right.
This particular coin was found approximately 18 inches below the grade.
Okay.
And there's a lot of big words. One's called stratigraphy, which essentially speaks to the integrity of the earth and the soil and how well it can preserve a particular artifact.
And that's stratigraphy?
Stratigraphy.
Okay, all right.
That 1794 coin was found in a layer that would have dated to 1810.
Okay.
So the question has to become, how does a 1794 coin that's so richly preserved, where the Liberty coin has Lady Liberty with a cap, and the cap would have had a red color, and that red color cap would have symbolized freedom. And they also would have wore a red gown. So during ancient Greece, if you were a free person you wore a red gown and you wore a red cap to symbolize that you were a free person. So why was this coin found in this neighborhood when there were only about 44 of this particular coin ever made? And why was that coin found at a layer where in 1810, a 1794 1-cent coin would be so richly preserved and somebody still had it? Well, it symbolized the very core of this neighborhood, the very thing that we talked about earlier, the story of disbelief, an area tied to free blacks, not slaves. Because in local time, persons would say, oh, well, you know, there was a slave population in that neighborhood. There were some little cabins and what have you. Again, overlooking the stately federal period houses. Blacks could have never lived in those houses. And so at this federal period.
A failure to imagine.
A failure to imagine. And so, you know, these things are being uncovered among several things at these various sites. And it's just extraordinary to be able to find and, as I mentioned, unearth aspects to go along with the historical documents that we have. Because in America, we believe if it's not written, it's not history. And when it is written, it is his story. And so it's important to understand that there is an American story that should reflect the Americans.
Yes. Professor Green, we've run out of time, unfortunately. But my absolute commitment to you and to those on the Hill is that we're going to stay with this story. And part of what I want to do with these cameras and this microphone is to further tell this story. And I really am committed to what I said earlier, and that is making some sort of arrangement with you and others who are involved in this project to come out to the Hill and to do a broadcast from the Hill, incorporating as many people from the descendants of the Hill as possible.
We welcome that.
Thank you so much for being on the Rock Newman Show. We'll be back, folks. Coming up, the controversy continues. Momentum is building to get Dan Snyder, owner of the Washington NFL franchise, to change the name. We will come back and discuss that subject in full detail when we return on the Rock Newman Show from Busboys and Poets. Hello to all my friends in the DMV. I am Rock Newman from the Rock Newman Show. I want to tell you about the MGM Grand National Harbor, the most exciting project to come to the District, Maryland, or Virginia in quite some time. You're going to have great fun. Come on down, support this project with all you have. It is going to be wonderful for the area. We're going to increase our tax base. We're going to get funding for the police department, for ambulance, for fire, for education. It is really a project that is going to benefit our area. Folks, we want to support in a very strong DMV kind of way this great project from the MGM Grand National Harbor.
My baby drives a bull handcuff.
The weekend is here, and no matter what the weather's like outside, you'll find the deals inside here in the beautiful showroom of the all-new Pohanka Hyundai in Capitol Heights during their giant Markdown Madness sale.
Smart shoppers know that every new Hyundai in Pohanka comes with Hyundai Assurance and America's best 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty. But why don't you tell them about the markdown sale, Joe?
I'll be happy to, Kim. Folks, shop around on the web, and you'll see lease payments on a new 2013 Elantra GLS at $179 a month. Today at Pohanka Hyundai, $99 a month. That's right, a $99 payment on a brand new Elantra.
And $89 a month on a new 2013 Accent GLS Automatic. How do they do it, Joe?
It must be the volume, Kim. A brand new building, hundreds of new Hyundais, and Pohanka's low payment and easy credit programs are designed to get everybody driving. But you have to get here today. Rush to the giant Markdown Madness sale at exit 13 off the Capitol Beltway.
Pohanka Hyundai, king of the Beltway. All financing for a limited term on approved HMF credit.
My baby drives a bull handcuff.
What's your
And now, the
editor
Rock
name?
Newman Show.
David Plotz.
Welcome back, folks, to the Rock Newman Show. Today, August the 10th, 2013. We're, again, broadcasting live from Busboys and Poets. And we're going to jump right into this segment. We're not going to play around with this. Look, those of you who know me, who have watched this show, who have paid attention to the Facebook post, know that I feel strongly and passionately about the subject of the name of the NFL franchise that's housed here in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. For the sake of this show, normally I don't use the R word, but I may say it a time or two here. What I am happy about is that the two gentlemen who are sitting here with me, one of them is a writer, is the editor, a sports editor for Slate magazine. You may or may not know that this week, Slate magazine, which is owned by the Washington Post, came out in a very well-written, strongly worded explanation, editorial, if you will, that henceforth they will no longer use the name Redskins to identify Washington's football team. Now, that is something that just simply, let's cut through all of the stuff. That's simply, that's the right thing to do. That's the fair and reasonable and respectful thing to do. My position is not to do it is the wrong thing. It's the immoral, it's the disrespectful thing to do. And, as by definition here, if you are practicing a behavior, and right now I am speaking to a gentleman that I met about a month ago. And I met him for the first time about a month ago. He's Dave McKenna's best friend. His name is Dan Snyder. I'm really speaking to Mr. Snyder right now because Mr. Snyder is the one that holds the key to the vault of some decency. And part of what we're attempting to do is not necessarily malign or throw dirt on him, but to ask him to take that key and open up the vault to decency. And the way that he can do that is to make a decision that, I'm going to tell you something. Experts, financial gurus, and the rest have figured out that he can open up that vault to decency and it not have any negative economic consequences to him or the asset that he owns. So, when I was talking about You know, it's the right thing to do, it's the decent thing to do, it's the respectful thing to do. Not to do it then is the wrong thing and the disrespectful thing to do. It has been expressed over time that why do you need to change the name? Why have hundreds of schools, organizations, colleges change the name? Because they became enlightened and understood that the name came from a racist, genocidal history. It emanates from that period of time. And it was established as a name for the franchise by a first-rate bigot, by a first-rate racist named George Preston Marshall. Now, frankly speaking, I really don't want to hear about what his intent was in naming the team. He was a certified, validated, self-expressed racist beyond question. So the name is racist. So, Mr. Snyder, we're asking and imploring and urging and encouraging that you would only do the right and decent thing, and that let's pierce again. Let's stay sharp and on point. Let's pierce again. There would be outrage in the African American community if the name were called the Washington Darkies or the Washington Sambos or the Washington Niggers. There would be outrage in the Jewish community, our Jewish brothers and sisters. There would be outrage. What's a disparaging name that Jews would be offended by?
Jew boy.
Hey, how about that? How about that, Mr. Snyder? How about if the team were called, because it's owned by a Jewish individual, of our Jewish brother, Dan Snyder, how about if it were called the Jew Boys? There's a nasty name. Is it the K word?
Yeah, the K word.
Yeah, the K word, kikes. What if the team were, would you feel offended? Well, you as a Jewish gentleman and those in the African American community and so on and so forth would feel rightly offended as Native Americans feel rightly offended. Let's get beyond, I really want to say bullshit, but I'm not going to say it. Let's get beyond the BS. Let's get beyond that and deal with what is real, and that the name should be changed. Congress is calling. A myriad of Native American organizations are calling for the name to be changed. And here's part of what I want to deal with, and I'm going to get to my two guests in a moment, Josh Levine and Dave McKenna. Dave McKenna is the gentleman that Dan Snyder that he sued, and little old Dave and his little old paper beat Mr. Snyder because he had to withdraw. He had to tuck his head between his tail, and he had to withdraw that lawsuit because it was ridiculous and frivolous and didn't make sense and all of that. Now, here is an issue that the very nature of this takes it beyond just being a Washington, D.C. story. It's a national story and should be a national outrage. But let me tell you which put a real stamp on making it a national story is that the commissioner of the NFL, Roger Goodell, most recently wrote a letter to the 10 Congress people who had stepped forth and asked that there be consideration and respect given to Native Americans and implored Mr. Snyder and the NFL to change the league. Roger Goodell, in one of the dumbest things that I've seen him do, and the guy's, the debate is out on whether he's a good commissioner or not. But I don't think he's done many things more dumb than what he did, and the letter that he wrote to Congress. And in specific here, what I want to deal with and connect some dots for those of you that are listening, is connect these dots. In his response to Congress, he, the commissioner of the NFL, used as a cornerstone of his defense a gentleman that appeared on a Dan Snyder produced segment who said that he was the chief of, what's the name of the tribe? Inuit?
He said a few, Inuit and Aleut.
Inuit and Aleut.
Aleut tribes of Alaska.
The Aleut tribe of Alaska.
He said he was a full-blooded Indian chief.
Full-blooded Indian chief. Now, Dave McKenna's research, and I'm saying this according to Dave McKenna, is saying that seems to have really pierced those claims, and that in fact what Mr. Snyder did was to bring on that program as a representative of Native American thought, a leader, a chief who Dave McKenna, I think, has some question about that or challenges that claim. So this gentleman came on. I talked to him this week. I asked him to come on. I told him the two of you were coming on. And he declined. He said he didn't want to come on. But if your claims are right, if your challenges are correct, that he's not an Indian chief, you certainly don't have the resources that a Dan Snyder or an NFL Roger Goodell have. But you've unearthed that these are bogus claims. And if you're right, there is no way that Mr. Snyder and all of his resources and the NFL and all of their resources could not have uncovered what you've uncovered. So what are we to take from that? We are to take from that Mr. Snyder put someone on that and made a claim of this person being representative and a chief and full-blooded and all the rest. And Roger Goodell, as the commissioner of the league, writes to Congress justifying the name of the Redskins, and one cornerstone of his justification was what you're saying was the bogus testimony of a chief who's not a chief. Now, if your information is right, that's a scandal. That is that Roger Goodell and Dan Snyder, if Mr. McKenna's information is correct, that's a scandal. You're misleading and perpetrating a fraud on the public to justify the unjustifiable. My guest in this hour, Josh Levin, sports editor for Slate Magazine, and Dave McKenna, who used to be with the City Paper that Dan Snyder sued. Welcome to the Rock Newman Show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's get into this. Let's get into this. Okay, to the news this week, Slate Magazine is never going to use the name Redskins again. Why?
Well, the Washington Post did this poll recently. I don't know if people saw that 2/3 of Washingtonians, I think, want the name Redskins to say. But then on the other side, maybe another 2/3 said they think the name is offensive. And so if you think about that, it's kind of hypocritical. A Post writer described it as compartmentalization, the idea that we just want to keep using this name because we like it, even though we recognize that it's offensive to people. And so we thought about that, and a lot of us have been saying it, for our whole lives and not even thinking about it.
Right.
But if you just stop, if you sit back, if you think, there's not really any way to justify it intellectually. And it's just so easy for us in our articles to say, if we want to write about the team, and who wouldn't want to write about RG3 or whoever, just to say Washington or Washington's NFL team. It's not really a problem for us not to use it. And I think it makes a strong statement to our readers and hopefully to other media outlets, to other people out there, that this is a word that we just shouldn't use anymore.
What kind of reaction have you gotten after the article was written? Your
David Plotz.
David Plotz had his byline on it. I'm aware that you certainly helped put that together. What
Right.
kind of reaction have you all received?
Well, I think a lot of people on the internet comments are very pro Redskins nickname and are very happy to tell you that you're PC, that you're ignorant of the history of the name. And then there are other people, other magazines, Mother Jones and The New Republic, both came out and said, we read your story and you've convinced us and we're not going to use it in our publications either. So we're very happy to see that. But I think it got very strong reactions on both sides, which is understandable. People love the team and people think if you are saying that the nickname's offensive, that you're somehow attacking them or attacking their heritage or something like that, which, I don't think is necessarily the case, but that's what people believe.
On such an emotional issue, I'll tell you where I've found some degree of success, like with my family. I mean, I had a nephew that was tragically killed recently by a drunk driver, and he was such a diehard fan that he and all that he was buried in Sean Taylor's jersey.
Okay.
And all of his family my family wore Sean Taylor jerseys. They are all fans. So where I've had some degree of success in attempting to sensitize people is just do something simple. To say that you can love the team, just rebuke the name. And start thinking about that a little bit.
Yeah.
We're going to go to a break and come back. Dave will come to you. This is going to be an interesting and spirited discussion. It's timely, and we've got to keep the pressure on, got to build the momentum. Is there an agenda here? You're damn right. The agenda is to try to create an environment where a respectful decision is made by the hierarchy, and I don't have to talk in code words, by Dan Snyder, to change the name. First of all, it's inevitable that it is going to happen. I don't understand exactly now why Mr. Snyder is taking so long, because he could get, to some extent, he could get ahead of this thing and sort of really seal a legacy for himself that would be positive. To continue to fight it is just going to make him perhaps the most hated owner since George Steinbrenner. We'll be back on the Rock Newman Show in just a few moments. Hello to all my friends in the DMV. I am Rock Newman from the Rock Newman Show. I want to tell you about the MGM Grand National Harbor, the most exciting project to come to the District, Maryland, or Virginia in quite some time. You're going to have great fun. Come on down, support this project with all you have. It is going to be wonderful for the area. We're going to increase our tax base. We're going to get funding for the police department, for ambulance, for fire, for education. It is really a project that is going to benefit our area. Folks, we want to support in a very strong DMV kind of way this great project from the MGM Grand National Harbor.
My baby drives a Pohanka Cup.
The weekend is here, and no matter what the weather's like outside, you'll find the deals inside here in the beautiful showroom of the all-new Pohanka Hyundai in Capitol Heights during their giant Markdown Madness sale.
Smart shoppers know that every new Hyundai in Pohanka comes with Hyundai Assurance and America's best 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty. But why don't you tell them about the markdown sale, Joe?
I'll be happy to, Kim. Folks, shop around on the web, and you'll see lease payments on a new 2013 Elantra GLS at $179 a month. Today at Pohanka Hyundai, $99 a month. That's right, a $99 payment on a brand new Elantra.
And $89 a month on a new 2013 Accent GLS Automatic. How do they do it, Joe?
It must be the volume, Kim. A brand new building, hundreds of new Hyundais, and Pohanka's low payment and easy credit programs are designed to get everybody driving. But you have to get here today. Rush to the giant Markdown Madness sale at exit 13 off the Capitol Beltway.
Pohanka Hyundai, king of the Beltway. All financing for a limited term on approved HMF credit.
My baby drives a Pohanka Cup.
And now, the Rock Newman Show.
Welcome back, folks. This is the Rock Newman Show. My guest in this segment, we're talking about the name of Washington's NFL franchise. There is an effort underfoot across all sections of the community to do the right thing and to get the name, the nickname changed. We want to try to give respect to the Native American community by, getting rid of the name of the team in the nation's capital, supposed to be the seat of democracy around the world, and we use a very disparaging name to refer to the team that is an insult to many Native Americans and other good people of conscience. My guest, Josh Levine from Slate Magazine, and Dave McKenna, formerly with the City Paper here in Washington, D.C. Dave was the subject of a lawsuit that was filed by the Washington football team owner, Dan Snyder. Just for a minute, Dave, take us through that. What was Dan Snyder's claim when he sued you?
Well, he made a lot of claims, but they were all. He just wanted me to stop writing about him. They were all bogus claims. But one among them was that my publication was anti-Semitic, and that's why we wrote about him, which is kind of funny considering that how sensitive he is culturally and racially in that situation. Yet not when it comes to Redskins.
Yeah. So kind of thin skin.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
It wasn't a real good PR move either. It didn't really work out.
Yeah, that didn't work out. So and what happened? What happened?
He dropped. It didn't. Nothing. I mean, as a PR move, it totally was a disaster. And so he had to. And as legally, it never had a chance anyway. But then when he saw that the PR thing was really working against him, he dropped it the day before the New York Times was going to publish a story in which he claimed he never read the story that he sued me over.
Okay.
So he really had to run that.
You know what, man? Look.
But this issue. Well, thanks for having us on. I haven't seen you this fired up since you were throwing Elijah Tillery over the top rope at the convention center. So it's an honor to be with you. But the issues we're talking about here, like all the name is blatantly, it's offensive. You can, at this point in time, you cannot deny its offensiveness.
Yeah.
So whether or not you should change it is maybe perhaps another issue. But to deny all the pro name crowd, their attacks on those who bring it up just seem absurd. Like, there's the big one is there's bigger issues. Well, that can be used to stifle any debate other than perhaps curing cancer or bringing world peace, including every civil rights issue. There's always a bigger issue.
Well, I mean, man, just go back. I mean, Snyder said, what, tradition. And the answer to that is, damn it, slavery was tradition.
Yeah, and well, the tradition is the original fight song. If that was written by George Preston Marshall's wife, allegedly, but I'm sure George Preston himself wrote it. Scalp 'em, swamp 'em, we will take 'em, big score. Read 'em, weep 'em, touchdown, we want heap more. And you can't. That's like that is
like
that's tradition. Well, they changed that.
Right.
If so much for tradition. It's just.
They are right that disparaging Native Americans is a tradition in America, so they've got that going for them.
And I went back and looked in the Washington Post archives, because the other thing is that it is a term of endearment, it's a term of respect, which is one of the things that Chief Dodson, who isn't really a chief, used on Dan Snyder's program.
I want to come back to that in just a moment.
And so I went back to the Washington Post archives from the late 20s and early 30s to look up, because Marshall was a Washington guy, even though he had the football team in Boston at the time.
George Preston
George Preston Marshall,
about.
the owner of the original owner of the Washington Redskins, and he's the one who named the team. And every reference I found for Redskin was offensive. There were no uses of proud Redskin. It was always like Redskins in some sort of combination with savages or Redskin bucks. It was a time when you could insult the Indian peoples openly, and that happened. There were it was never a term of endearment. It was never respectful. So I don't know where these people are getting this.
Yeah, and folks, let me opine on this for a moment, because where my sensitivity, no one was a bigger fan. No one was a bigger fan than I was, and I mean, I had Redskins posters all over my wall. I remember having the picture, a giant blow-up I had specially made of Larry Brown, number 43, scoring one of those, just somersaulting kind of touchdowns. That was posted all over my bedroom. So, this is coming from someone who was a fan that didn't have the sensitivity, that sort of didn't know the background of the name. And a big part of what sensitized me was a discussion that I had with Kathy Hughes, who is the chairman of the board of Radio 1, WL, now TV 1, and the rest. And Kathy talked to me about a history of how the United States government paid settlers at a particular point in time to kill the natives. And at some point, the government was responsible for picking up the bodies. And it got a little cumbersome and heavy. And so in order to make it easier, they would scout them. The verification to get the payment wasn't an invoice. The invoice was the scalp of a Native American. And so once she shared that with me, that's now when I hear the name, I cringe, because that is the image. And to the extent that there's one kernel of truth to that, which there is, then how can we continue to be so insensitive? And I'm talking really to the community at large out there. But let's come back here for a moment to how Snyder tried to justify it with the quote-unquote chief, how Dodson used that as part of his justification. Talk to me about what research you did to find out, to substantiate your claim that he's not truly either a full-blooded Indian or chief or whatever.
Well, I had seen when it was a big deal when everything about the Redskins around here is a big deal. And so when this Chief Dodson came out and showed up on a Dan Snyder produced infomercial saying, I'm a full-blooded Indian chief. I think that the name is a term of endearment, it's respect. And he just went way overboard. Like I was watching him, and he seemed almost like a cartoon Indian. He was saying, on the reservation, we have powwows, and we call each other Redskin. Hey, Redskin, it's a term of respect. And I'm going, it just didn't ring true. And so I just did a little, and then Goodell uses them in a letter. And so I just looked into it a little bit, and there's no, there's no reference to him as a chief anywhere. He's not a full-blooded Indian. His own family says this. The chief is a nickname, and that the only time that chief showed up in any paperwork, official paperwork, was in police papers for criminal situations where his nickname was given as chief. But again, he just seemed to be having. I don't know why he went on the program to make these claims.
And I talked this week when I talked to him, and I just want to say for fairness and balance, he said he was a chief, he was full blown, that somebody was
calls
a
him
sister.
a chief? Who calls him? Who did he say he's a chief?
Well, I'm saying, and that somebody, I think maybe that you quoted as his sister wasn't really his sister or something like that. And the other thing that he told me is that he was not a Washington football fan, that he was a Steelers fan, because I thought maybe this is someone that was just so diehard, that wanted to come out. So he did, again, again, I need to say he refuted those claims, that you make, but he did say that, he didn't want to come on the program. I really wish he had. And what I tried to say to him is,
Well,
no matter how passionately...
the tribes that he claims to represent don't claim him. Also, they say we don't even use the term chief. We're not Indian, so everything he said was wrong. We don't have reservations,
Right.
so everything he said was just bogus.
Right, okay.
And this is the stuff that.
I mean, what I said to him, what I said to him was, no matter how passionately I might feel about something, I am not beyond extending an opportunity for someone to come on and to tell me why I shouldn't be so passionate, or to defend their position. So that I just want everybody out there to know that opportunity was given. I also called to ask if Dan Snyder might want to come on, and I did not get a response. As a matter of fact, I think I put that in writing, because when I say I made the invitation, I want to have proof of that invitation. So the invitation was given, and no one, Mr. Snyder or no one from the Redskins organization wanted to come on.
He does interviews only with his employees.
Well, let me say this.
Chris Cooley.
What do you guys think about why Roger Goodell, who would think is a relatively intelligent guy, would put himself in the line of fire like that? We want to talk. I've got my thoughts. You want to? Yeah.
Well, just think about how desperate the team and Goodell must be to put this guy forward. The people who defend the name say it's not actually offensive to Native Americans. If you look at the polls, there are a lot of them that actually support it. And then I think this Chief Dodson thing reveals how much of a lie that is. If they would put this guy forward, that just this random dude comes out and says, I'm an Indian chief, and they're like, all right, we're putting you on TV immediately. We're sending a letter to Congress. Like, this is the only guy in the world who they can get who will say these things. And I think...
if he is bogus like is being discussed here, again, this makes what Snyder did and then the commissioner did shameful and fraudful.
I agree. And
one more thing. When the Deadspin story that I wrote had all these claims that claims is I think they were stronger than claims. I referenced everything I put in there about his background, about the alleged chief not being a real chief. Neither the NFL nor the Redskins ever contacted Deadspin and said no one challenged that information. So I believe that shows that it was pretty ironclad.
You asked what Goodell's motivation could be. He serves at the pleasure of the NFL owners. He's not their boss. Dan Snyder is really his boss. And so I think he's just doing Snyder's bidding. At a certain point, you would think that he would wise up and realize that this is not a good look for him or for the NFL. But I think for the time being, Snyder's a really powerful owner, and nobody stood up to him, not even the commissioner.
Yeah, and this week, as we discussed earlier, Mark Murphy, a former proud Redskin football player and top guy at the Green Bay Packers, made comments saying, he's personally offended by the name Redskins.
He came out.
So I think that's devastating.
I think Mark Murphy came out in what I thought was a strongly worded rebuke that he felt as if the name should be changed. A former all-pro player with the team, and of course, 2 weeks earlier, you've got Darrell Green and Art Monk. Let me put it this way. I feel as if, from some close observation, that there are now players on the team who are starting to have discomfort with the name. And it would be, I also that there is some squirming being done. Are you guys aware of Snyder hiring the pollster, the sort of right-wing conservative pollster,
Frank Luntz,
Frank Luntz, to do some sort of survey,
Correct,
poll, or anything?
Yeah, and that that came out, and that was a sign that shows he is concerned about the name. And if he would have used, again, I go back to whether or not the name should be changed is a very debatable thing because it has been there for so long.
But I don't think it is debatable. If you determine that it is offensive and disrespectful, then I mean, people are going to debate it, but I think people are debating it. What they're doing is they're very emotionally attached, and they are attempting to come up with these justifications.
But Snyder did not name. He didn't name the team, so it's not his. It's not on him. But yet, rather than say, I didn't name the team, and this is what it's called, he attacks anyone who says, this is offensive. And the money he spent on Frank Luntz would have much been better served in some sort of outreach. Because I think he could make this. He could diffuse the offensiveness of the name, I think, if he did make the organization in any way a symbol of pride or in any way work with the Smithsonian. Just do something, some kind of PR effort rather than the PR effort of going to the USA Today and saying, put it in caps, I will never change, which just made him seem like, Custer.
Yeah, that was, look, I think, I've looked at this guy. This is a brilliant dude, man. Dan Snyder is a brilliant businessman. He is a marketing genius.
I would debate that.
Well, I'm trying to look at the...
Look how Johnny Rockets did last week.
Yeah, no, but cha-ching, I'm talking, and I'm really talking about...
He sold a radio station last week at like an 80% loss.
Radio and newspapers have lost their value. The point I'm making is like with the team, for example. He squeezes every single dollar, man. I mean, every inch of that stadium, the marketing and all the rest, and the value continues to rise. So my point here is he's way too smart to be doing these stupid things, such as saying, put it in, I mean, that is the epitome, the apex of arrogance, and a backlash.
Well, yeah, I would say arrogance is a much greater term than for him than brilliance, because he came up in a business era in the 1990s when arrogance was a wonderful trait to have. Bravery, business bravery was his timing was perfect, and he did very well in the 90s with mergers and acquisitions and with IPO offerings on Wall Street, and that's where he made his money. But since then, the arrogance has not served him well. It has only gotten him in trouble.
Well, I think the smart thing that he did was buy into the NFL. It's not possible to lose money if you're an NFL owner. I mean, the NFL is raking in money more than any other industry in America.
It is.
And if anyone could be unsuccessful in the NFL, it's Dan Snyder. And the fact that he has succeeded and the value of the team has risen just shows that anyone could be an NFL owner as long as they had the wherewithal to actually buy into the league in the first place.
He has removed 30,000.
You guys are not giving him any credit. I give him a little bit of credit.
He's removed 30,000 seats from his stadium in the last 4 years. You know that.
We're trying to be fair and balanced.
Yeah,
here.
well, we want to be fair and balanced. And we're going to be fair and balanced when we come back after these brief messages.
My baby drives a pro handcuff.
The weekend is here, and no matter what the weather's like outside, you'll find the deals inside here in the beautiful showroom of the all-new Pohanka Hyundai in Capitol Heights during their giant Markdown Madness sale.
Smart shoppers know that every new Hyundai in Pohanka comes with Hyundai Assurance and America's best 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty. But why don't you tell them about the markdown sale, Joe?
I'll be happy to, Kim. Folks, shop around on the web, and you'll see lease payments on a new 2013 Elantra GLS at $179 a month. Today at Pohanka Hyundai, $99 a month. That's right, a $99 payment on a brand new Elantra.
And $89 a month on a new 2013 Accent GLS Automatic. How do they do it, Joe?
It must be the volume, Kim. A brand new building, hundreds of new Hyundais, and Pohanka's low payment and easy credit programs are designed to get everybody driving. But you have to get here today. Rush to the giant Markdown Madness sale at exit 13 off the Capitol Beltway.
Pohanka Hyundai, king of the Beltway. All financing for a limited term on approved HMF credit.
My baby drives a pro handcuff.
Hello to all my friends in the DMV. I am Rock Newman from the Rock Newman Show. I want to tell you about the MGM Grand National Harbor, the most exciting project to come to the District, Maryland, or Virginia in quite some time. You're going to have great fun. Come on down, support this project with all you have. It is going to be wonderful for the area. We're going to increase our tax base. We're going to get funding for the police department, for ambulance, for fire, for education. It is really a project that is going to benefit our area. Folks, we want to support in a very strong DMV kind of way this great project from the MGM Grand National Harbor.
And now, the Rock Newman Show.
Welcome back, folks. This is the last segment of the show today, Saturday, August the 10th. And we are talking about the issues surrounding the effort to have the name changed, and what I personally think is a very deceitful, very fraudulent effort by the commissioner of the NFL to attempt to support a cause and a name remaining that many find disrespectful. Let's jump back into this with my guest here, Josh Levine, who is sports editor of Slate Magazine, and Dave McKenna, who Dan Snyder actually had a lawsuit against that he ended up having to withdraw. Let me ask you, Dave, what do you think are going to be the next steps from Snyder and the organization? What's your crystal ball tell you?
He's kind of, with the put it in caps, he's kind of painted himself in a corner. I don't think he can ever change the name. I do not think he will. If he gets rid of the team, he's been forced through bad business to get rid of pretty much every business entity he's had. Six Flags threw him off. They went bankrupt. Johnny Rockets, he was going to put 1,000 units in. He ended up putting none in. They sold at a loss recently. Dick Clark Productions, he's out of that. His radio stations are going away. So perhaps he will be forced to leave the Redskins through some kind of business reason. And when that happens, I believe the name would change then. The pressure is going to come, like when Mark Murphy is saying stuff, the head of the Green Bay Packers, and you get Darryl Green, being kind of wishy-washy, but yet hinting that he finds the name offensive. It's going to become more and more a national story where kids, college kids, high school kids, no matter how great RG3 is, they're going to not want to wear Redskins paraphernalia. I think that you're going to see that real soon, that it's become kind of a cringing kind of symbol. And I grew up here too, and I have, other than, RG3 has made socks, Redskins socks cool. I have every article of clothing in or out of Redskins I've worn my whole life. Yeah. And yet now when I look at it, it's like there's kind of something much more than the lawsuit.
Yeah,
this has made me cringe.
You bring up something that is important, I think, and fascinating. In RG3, they have, assuming that he comes back to health and comes back to the kind of physical shape that he was in, at the start of the season and going through the season last year. They have arguably the most dynamic player in the league, not just the most dynamic player. Let me say this. I was at his wedding, and this guy has an aura about him that is really electric. He is a people person. Even the reality that he married a white girl. I remember sitting in that reception and being being at the wedding and thinking what a beautiful thing it was. I mean, it just sort of what went out the door were any divisions. It was his family and her family and everybody in between, and it was as if, there was a suspended moment where all of the things that divide us were not present. It just was people in a room of all hues, all colors, all economic, positions, just enjoying themselves. And RG3 sort of was the centerpiece of that. He's just, and so he has the kind of personality that can, which is something I actually said to his father, that I think that this man, clearly he can be the most galvanizing force in this region,
Right.
maybe ever, and not just for the region, but well beyond. He has that kind of charisma.
Well, that says as much about the NFL as it does about RG3 too. I totally believe what you say. I agree. He could be the most galvanizing force.
Yeah.
But do you think he would take a stand on this?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I don't get into that at all. That's going to be a decision for him to make. I mean, I clearly, in a very public way, make my position known. But my point here is when you have that kind of a dynamic player that can do so much for the organization, for the league, and can be a true kind of role model, and you have his brilliance, you have his energy muddied by the name. I mean, let's just think about this for a second. That if the name were changed and the organization nor RG3 has to carry the burden now of the name, because the name, say what anyone will, the name has become a burden. It's an albatross. Now you have to, look, if I'm on that team, man, I'm carrying the banner. I understand that. But if you just play make pretend for a moment and that the name gets changed, there will be some people, oh, why did you change the name? And you have to change the name. Here's what will happen. I figured this out. If you say today, 2013, before the season starts, that for the 2014 season, the name is going to be changed. We're going to have a contest, whatever, and by Christmas time, we're going to name the team. Every piece of burgundy and gold paraphernalia that has an emblem on it, the R word or anything else, in every store is going to be gobbled up because we want a piece of that. We want a piece of that tradition. The new name, people are going to want that first. There is an economic bonanza that can come with the name change. Beyond that, the moral issue, the sort of the leadership here in the nation's capital, there is just an opportunity that I don't understand why it's not being taken. And when you take that to RG3, somewhere RG3 or all the other players are gonna start getting questioned about this. And it's a distraction. It's a distraction when someone like him and some of his teammates are trying to blossom, let the sun shine in. There is a cloud that ain't going away, and that's really unfortunate for the players.
Well, like I'm being a fan, and like local people here, fans and players have a personal stake in the Redskins. So, and I kind of think that what the local people think is not going to change anything. I mean, it's not going to force any kind of change. But when outsiders like the view, I think I might be too close to it also. But when people I would like to hear what Josh thinks is going to happen. He would have a much more. He's a wise man for one thing. But also I would like to hear because he's not from here. He's a carpetbagger. But I would like Josh. What do you think?
Carpetbagger. What do you think?
What do you think? Me and Rock are from here. You're an outsider.
I think that if people like us are saying Snyder should change the name, that'll just harden him in the opposite direction. I think that guys like Mark Murphy and other prominent figures in the NFL, I think that is the only thing that could really affect change. And if players on his own team started to talk about it, I think that is an extremely difficult thing to ask a player on the team to
It is.
come out.
It is.
It's unrealistic, I think.
It's an extremely difficult. It's unrealistic. But let me say this. You know, I looked back at Tiger Woods, and Tiger Woods had a moment, if I can share this. Muhammad Ali became the greatest, not because he said, I'm the greatest, but he became the most recognizable figure on the planet because of a moral position that he took, a stake in the ground. He said, I'm not going to kill, me as a black man, I'm not going to kill brown people because these white people are sending me there and not treating me right at home. And so there was a moral issue there, and that he was, you know, vilified by some, but ended up being adored around the world and respected around the world as a person of conscience.
By young people.
Yes, by young people. Tiger Woods, back when the guy Hootie down at the Masters was saying that women could not play, Tiger had an opportunity. At that point, TV ratings were about Tiger Woods.
Right.
I mean, if Tiger Woods played in a tournament, there were phenomenal ratings. And if he didn't play in a tournament, there were non-existent ratings. So that gave him as an individual a tremendous amount of leverage and a tremendous amount of power. And while that debate was raging, I just wanted Tiger to step up as a moral force and say, because he had the big stick, to step up and say, this is not right. This is not right. And he had an opportunity, and I think he would have been respected around the world for that, way beyond just his game. So when you talk about this, it is a tough thing. It's not an impossible thing, but it's a tough thing because, I mean, you know, what the consequences of what could happen to anybody that does that, it's way more than a notion. So
Well,
it is not an easy thing.
I think it's a question of empathy. It's recognizing that something that is maybe not that big a deal to you can be incredibly painful to other people. And I think we've seen this with the issue of gay athletes, that there are a lot of people coming out now and saying, you know, I'm not gay, but I have gay people in my family, and I recognize that, you know, these people should have the same rights that we do. And if I had a gay teammate, then I would be fine with that. But who in the NFL has a Native American in their family? Native Americans are so marginalized in our society. And I think that that's the sad thing about this, is that people just can't empathize because they just say, like, well, who cares? Like, I can say this name all the time. It's not like I'm going to run across somebody, like, on my block who's going to be offended by it. They just can't look outside themselves and look beyond, you know, what they see in their neighborhood or in the locker room to know that this is offensive to a big group of people.
Yeah, I was so touched by I think it was about a 17-minute film that I saw this week. It was a film about Native Americans that live at the foot of Mount Rushmore, and talked about how they came in there and took their land, you know, got tricked into treaties and whatever, put up figures that, you know, certainly not figures that they worship. And it was a filmmaker, it was a photographer who turned into a filmmaker. And he actually allowed the people in that community, in that Native American community, to speak. It's one of the saddest things that I've ever seen. And as I looked at that film and I listened to the arguments of their bigger fish to fry, it's really something that makes you scratch your head. Of course, there are other issues that must be dealt with, that people are trying to be dealt with, but the overt, to me, disrespect that comes with this continuing reference from the seat of power, from the seat of government of a democracy, is a change that is so long overdue. Guys, we're about any time. Any parting words?
Well, I was wondering, as Washingtonians, what you guys thought about the Bullets change to Wizards and whether that would have any effect, because people seem to really not like the new name and have nostalgia for the old name. It's obviously a different kind of issue, but I wonder if that's hanging over this question of changing the name a little bit.
You know, I thought it was socially sensitive because at the time they moved here, Washington D.C. was the murder capital of the country.
Yeah.
And so to have a nickname, the Bullets, wasn't too cool. Now, when I heard Wizards, I wanted to make sure that they weren't going to wear sheets.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are afraid that if you change the name, then the name will be bad and it'll be stupid. Everybody hates new nicknames.
I think he's right. Had they come up with a cooler nickname or won a championship, had the Wizards done that after changing the name, I think it would be much more palatable or much easier for Snyder to change the name. I don't think he can really change the name. I don't think Snyder can change the name.
And you don't think he can change